Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley, the place where stories linger long after the lights go out. Tonight, we prepared chilling tales paired with the soothing sound of rain to ignite your imagination and make your heart race. If you feel the cold creeping in, tap that like button. It helps keep the shadows alive. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from or share the scariest moment that sent shivers down your spine. Don't forget to subscribe. You wouldn't want to miss what lurks in the darkness ahead. I wake up again, not knowing how long I've been here, in this space. My eyes are blurry at first, and the light flickers like it's struggling to keep me in this moment. The air smells stale, and I feel a strange weight pressing on me. A box. I don't know what's outside. All I know is that I'm in this moving, shifting place, and I don't remember how I got here. The sound of something shuffling somewhere in the distance. It stops as suddenly as it begins. I don't know if it's real. I can't tell if it's inside my mind or coming from the walls, the space around me. I sit up, rubbing my eyes, trying to bring some clarity. But everything feels wrong, blurry, like I'm standing in a dream. The walls of this box, they don't feel like walls at all. They don't feel like anything. The surface, smooth. Almost like it's constantly changing shape, molding itself into something else. But it never looks different. It's just the same. A space that's small, but not enough to suffocate me, yet I feel trapped. Somehow, someway, I can hear muffled sounds, like whispers, coming from somewhere in the corners of this box. But when I try to focus on them, they fade away. They stop, only to return when I let my guard down. At times, it feels like I'm imagining it. I must be. There's no way something can be here with me. I can't even see anything. But the sounds, they make my skin crawl. And they're always changing. From whispers to something else. Something more like footsteps. Every time I open my eyes, it's like my world is a little different. Like something has shifted, moved, changed, just beyond my vision. The air around me grows thick with a sense of unease. What was once just a simple act of breathing now feels like a battle against something I can't understand. I try to move, but the box doesn't let me. It's not a physical barrier, it's something more. Something intangible, like a presence I can't escape. Each step I take feels like it's controlled, directed, like my feet are following some unspoken rule. The very space I'm in seems to respond to my every movement, shifting just enough to keep me off balance. The moment I try to grasp for some memory of how I ended up here, it slips away, like a dream dissolving upon waking. No faces. No names. Just this overwhelming sensation of being watched, of being part of something I don't understand. There are no windows, no doors, no exits. I keep hoping that something, anything, will change. But nothing does. My hand brushes against the walls again. This time, there's a sound. A soft scraping, like metal dragging on something brittle. I freeze. It's close. Too close. The whisper returns, louder this time, almost like a voice I should recognize. But I don't. I want to scream, to call out, but the words don't come. Instead, I hear myself breathe, my breath shallow, my chest tight, as if the very act of exhaling would break the illusion that this is a safe place. I glance around the box again, and I realize something. The shape of it is changing. I can feel it, though I can't see it. The walls are moving. Slowly. quietly. The whispers grow stronger, and the sound of the dragging metal shifts into something else, something heavier. Then it stops. The silence feels more oppressive than before. I'm not sure what's worse, the sounds or the silence. I close my eyes, wishing that when I open them again, it will all be over. That I'll wake up somewhere else, somewhere familiar. But no! When I open them again, nothing is the same. I blink and the box is different. It's not a big change, not something that could be seen at first glance. But I feel it. The air is colder, sharper, like the space itself has adjusted to something else, something that wasn't here before. The walls seem more solid now, as though they'd grown thicker. The light, which once flickered irregularly, now hums in a steady pulse, like a heartbeat. My feet shuffle on the floor, and I can hear the faintest sound of creaking wood beneath me, but when I look down, all I see is the same smooth, gray surface. No wood. No seams. Just smooth, featureless walls. The sound must have been my imagination. Right? It has to be. But the creeping unease lingers. It's not just the sounds anymore, it's the feeling that something is there. I am never alone. I know that now. I don't even need to hear the whispers to know it. I step forward, and the air seems to press against me harder. It feels like I'm moving through a dense fog, thick and suffocating. The walls of this box are closing in, tightening, just out of reach of my mind's ability to fully comprehend. Something is changing, always shifting. I try to steady myself, to think clearly, but the longer I stand here, the more it feels like I've lost control of my own body. The box, it moves. I feel it, the sensation of sliding, of shifting, as though it's carrying me somewhere. But where? Where am I going? The walls press closer now, and I have to force myself not to panic. It's just a box, right? I remind myself. But then the whisper returns, louder this time, clearer. A voice. A name. No, not a name. It's my own voice, but distorted, muffled, like it's coming from the very walls themselves. My heart pounds in my chest as I reach out instinctively, my hand brushing the wall again. The metal scrape is unmistakable. And the voice? The voice gets louder. I press my palms against the wall, but it doesn't feel the same as before. It's colder, almost damp. I pull my hand away in a hurry. Something is wrong with the surface. I can feel it now, the texture changing, as though the box itself is breathing. I stumble backward, shaking my head, trying to make sense of the situation. It's impossible. The more I try to understand, the less I can. The box, the space, the whispers, they're all blending together, like I'm losing my grip on reality. Suddenly, I feel it. A weight. A pressure behind me, pushing me forward. I look over my shoulder, but there's nothing there. The box is as empty as it ever was. But the pressure doesn't go away. It intensifies. The walls, they're closing in. I start to run, my breath quick and ragged. My feet hit the ground harder, faster, but it doesn't matter. The space seems to shrink with every step. The box is moving faster now, jerking to a new position, the walls pressing closer in on me, squeezing me into the center. The whispers are louder than ever, and there's a new sound, something dragging, scraping across the floor, getting closer, closer. I turn back, but there's nothing to see. Just the same, cold, empty space. But I can feel it. Something is there. It's following me. I crash into the wall, desperate to escape, but it's like trying to escape my own mind. The walls move around me. The space is narrowing, closing in on me. It's happening faster now. I scream, but my voice is drowned out by the sound of footsteps. There's no mistaking it. They're not mine. They're not just whispers anymore. I hear the distinct sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from behind. But when I turn around, nothing is there. Only the endless, empty gray walls bending and shifting around me. The whispers are replaced by a single, clear voice. It's too familiar, but I can't place it. You can't escape, it says. The words make my blood run cold. I don't know what's happening, but I know one thing for sure. I'm not alone in this box. And whatever is with me is getting closer. The footsteps stop. Silence. For a moment, I dare to breathe. It's quiet again, but I don't trust the quiet. I never trust it now. My heart hammers against my chest, so loud I'm sure it echoes in the walls, but there's no way to know for certain. My senses feel warped, like I'm drowning in this place, but there's no water, just this heavy, suffocating air. I stand still, not knowing what to do. The walls are pressing in, though not physically. It's more of a presence, a sensation that they're moving, slowly closing the space around me. The floor feels uneven beneath my feet, and my legs tremble. I feel like I'm being tested, pushed to the limit, but for what? I can't figure it out. Then, the whispers return, barely audible at first, like a hum in the back of my mind. I try to block it out, to focus, but it's impossible. The voice is there again, clear and sharp this time, like a blade cutting through the silence. You're not going anywhere. I freeze. It's my voice. But it isn't. The walls don't move, but the air around me does. There's a subtle shift, like the space is rearranging itself. My vision flickers, warping in and out of focus, like the world around me isn't quite real. I take a step forward, then another, not sure where I'm going. The sound of my footsteps mingles with the faint scrape of metal. No, it's something scraping, something dragging across the ground. The noise is getting louder again, closer. But it's not just the noise. Something is growing inside of me. Fear. Fear that I can't escape. That I never will. I slam my fist against the wall, desperate for a reaction. Something to prove this place is just a trick, just a product of my mind. But the wall gives nothing. It's as if my fist was never even there. No dent. No movement. Then the voice speaks again, soft but piercing. Why do you keep fighting? You're safe here. The words hang in the air, cold and unfeeling. I shake my head, refusing to accept them. Safe? How could I be safe in this box? I'm trapped. There's no escape. No way out. The walls are closing in, the space narrowing again. And the noise. That scraping sound is getting louder, closer. I don't know how much longer I can take this. My chest is tight, my breath shallow. The box feels like it's suffocating me. I move again, this time quicker, more urgently. But every direction I take is met with the same relentless pressure. I can't escape. I can't hide. The voice echoes once more, colder this time. You're never going to leave. You're never going to be free. My fingers tremble as I run them along the walls, trying to find something, anything, that will break the illusion. But there's nothing. Just smooth, unyielding surface. The walls are the same as always. The box hasn't changed. And yet, I feel a shift. A change. Something else is here now. I turn around quickly, but there's nothing in my line of sight. Just empty space. Except the shadows. The shadows have deepened, stretching unnaturally, pooling in the corners of the box. They're moving. The edges are curling, wrapping themselves around the walls. They're growing. The shadows are alive, and they're reaching for me. I try to back away, but the space constricts again. My every movement feels slow, like I'm swimming through something dense, something that's pulling me deeper. The shadows aren't just shadows anymore. I can feel them, creeping, slithering, wrapping themselves around my legs, my arms, my neck. I gasp for air, but it's not air. It's thick and suffocating, like I'm choking on the very essence of the box itself. I can't breathe. I can't think. I can't. The scraping noise is back, louder now. It's almost as if the walls themselves are shifting, bending, warping into something else. Something alive. I scream, but the voice inside my head, my voice, twisted and distorted, tells me to be quiet. There's no point in fighting. You're already here. The walls are closing in. The shadows are pulling tighter. I can feel it now, the weight of it all. The pressure. The fear. The realization that I may never escape this place. The whispers fade into silence again. And for a moment, I think I'm alone. But then, I feel it, a breath against my neck. It's real. And it's not mine. I freeze, the breath on my neck lingering like a chill I can't shake off. My heart races, louder now, echoing in my ears, drowning out the whispers, the scraping, the dragging. Everything goes still for a moment, so still it's suffocating. I can't even hear the sound of my own breathing, just this heavy, pressing silence. I turn around slowly, afraid of what I might see, but I don't want to see it. Nothing. I am still alone, at least in sight. The walls are as gray and featureless as they've always been. The box feels the same. But the air, the air feels wrong. It's too thick. It's like a weight, pressing against my lungs, making each breath harder than the last. But then, I hear it again, the dragging sound. Closer. So close. It's almost right behind me. I spin around, but this time, I'm ready. Nothing. Again. The space is empty, the shadows still and unmoving, yet my skin crawls as if something unseen is wrapping around me, suffocating me from all sides. The walls are closing in again, but not physically, no, it's something deeper than that. It's like they're closing in on my mind. I take a shaky step forward, but the pressure grows heavier, like the very box is pushing me back. I feel trapped, suffocated, not just by the space around me, but by something inside me. Something that's growing, taking root in the back of my mind. The voice returns, but it's no longer a whisper. It's clear, crisp, cutting through the silence like a blade. You can't outrun it. I stumble, a sharp gasp leaving my throat. My feet slip on the floor, but I catch myself. I don't know what's happening, but the walls, they're changing. The space around me is twisting, reshaping itself, like it's molding into something else. The shadows, they move now, stretching, twisting. I watch in disbelief as they shift, becoming more solid, more real. They're no longer just in the corners. They're everywhere. I try to move, to run, but my feet are stuck. It's like the ground is pulling me in, like something beneath the surface is reaching out to hold me down. I struggle, but it's useless. You're part of it now, the voice says, so close, so cold. You've always been. I look around frantically, my breath shallow, every instinct screaming at me to escape, to find a way out. But there is no escape. The box, whatever it is, it's not just a place, it's a part of me. The walls are no longer walls. The shadows are no longer shadows. They're living, breathing things, wrapping around me, tightening with each passing second. I close my eyes, trying to block it out, to shut everything out, but it doesn't work. The darkness inside my mind is just as real as the darkness in the box. I can feel it. It's crawling inside of me, through my veins, seeping into my thoughts. I won't let you go, the voice murmurs, and this time, I hear something else, something darker, more menacing. It's not just the voice of the box anymore. It's something else. Something older, more sinister. The shadows grow, expanding, swallowing the space around me. I try to move, but my limbs feel heavy, slow, like they're made of lead. The walls, the floor, the air, they all press in on me, crushing me from every side. The box is no longer a space. It's a prison, a mind game, a nightmare. And then I see it. Out of the corner of my eye, a figure. Tall, dark, featureless. It's just a shape at first, but as I turn my head, it solidifies, becoming clearer. It's standing in the far corner of the box, watching me. I can't move. I can't breathe. The shadows are pulling me in, and the figure is growing closer, moving with unnatural ease, as though it's part of the very space around me. Its shape is shifting, changing, like it's made of the same shadows that now fill the box. It steps closer, its presence overwhelming. And I know, deep down, what it is. It's the box. The thing that's controlling me. The thing that's keeping me trapped in this endless cycle of fear and confusion. I try to scream, but my voice is lost in the suffocating air. The figure is so close now, its form twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. I can feel its coldness as it reaches toward me, its fingers long and twisted, like they don't belong to a human at all. You belong to me, it whispers, its voice like the scratching of nails on stone. I try to pull away, to break free, but it's pointless. The walls are closing in, the shadows are everywhere, and the figure's cold fingers are tightening around my wrist, pulling me into the darkness. I close my eyes, feeling the coldness consume me. And then, I hear it again. The dragging. Closer now. So close, I can feel the vibrations in the floor. The scraping is louder, more deliberate. But it's not just the figure anymore. The box is alive. And it's coming for me. The walls aren't walls. The air isn't air. This place, it's not a box. It's a prison. And I can't escape. Not anymore. I can't see it, but I feel it. The walls, they're not just walls anymore. They're alive. The space itself is a part of the thing that's keeping me here. The shadows stretch out like tendrils, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into the box. The air is so thick now that each breath feels like I'm drowning, suffocating on something that isn't real, but is real enough to destroy me. The dragging sound is louder, closer, unmistakable. It's moving, relentless. But there's no escape. The walls are closing in faster now, the shadows growing thicker, the air colder, the pressure more intense. And then I hear the voice again. It's not the same voice anymore. It's deeper, more resonant. And somehow, I know, it's not mine. You thought you could outrun it, it murmurs, its tone almost mocking. But you can't outrun yourself. The figure from before is still there, but it's not just standing in the corner anymore. It's moving. Its shape is shifting, changing with every step it takes toward me. The shadows bend and twist as it moves, like it's made of them, like it's a part of the very darkness surrounding me. Its face, if it has one, is still hidden, a blur of dark smoke that shifts in and out of focus. I try to move, try to back away, but I can't. My feet won't respond. It's like the box has taken away my ability to move. My legs feel like lead, my body like it's made of stone, unable to move, unable to escape. Why are you fighting me? The voice whispers again, a cold, hollow sound that resonates in the pit of my stomach. You're already mine. You always have been. I close my eyes, pressing my hands to my ears, trying to block out the voice, trying to block out everything. But it doesn't work. The darkness is inside me now. It's not just in the box. It's in my head, in my thoughts. It's been there all along, waiting for me to realize it. The walls are no longer just walls. They're moving, shifting, like the entire space is a living, breathing entity bending to its will. I can feel the temperature drop, the air growing colder, heavier, as though the box itself is trying to crush me. I try to scream, but the sound is swallowed up by the thick air. It's like my voice doesn't exist here anymore. Like I don't exist. The figure reaches out toward me, its shadowy fingers curling and uncurling in the dim light, its presence pressing in on me. And then, in the silence that follows, I hear it. A single, unmistakable sound. The scraping. It's coming from all around me now, from every direction. It's not just one thing scraping against the floor anymore. It's everywhere. It's coming from the walls, from the ceiling, from beneath my feet. I can feel the vibrations in my bones. It's getting closer, closer, faster, louder. And it's not just scraping anymore. It's pounding, like something huge is trying to break through. I look up, frantic, searching for any sign of where it's coming from. But there's nothing. Just the dark, the shifting shadows, the suffocating air. And then, as if a switch has been flipped, the walls move again. Not just closing in. Shifting. Expanding. The space itself seems to stretch, warping and twisting, and I can feel myself being pulled towards something. Something terrible. Something I can't see, but can feel deep inside my chest, in my bones. The figure looms closer, its form now fully solidified in the shadows. It's no longer a formless shape, but something human. A distorted, twisted version of a person, its face hidden in the deep darkness of the box. Its eyes, if it has eyes, are empty holes. Just darkness, staring at me. I open my mouth to scream, but the sound is caught in my throat. I can't breathe. I can't speak. I can't move. You're here, it says, its voice a low growl that rumbles in my ears. You've always been here, and you'll never leave. I try to break free, to run, to fight, but I can't. The shadows have me now. They're holding me, wrapping around my body, tightening with each passing second, like the box is trying to swallow me whole. And then, the pounding stops. For a moment, everything is still. Too still. I can feel the air shift again. It's different now. The walls aren't just pressing in, they're pulling away. The figure is still there, but it's no longer reaching for me. It's standing, watching, waiting. The whispers are gone. The noise is gone. The only thing left is the darkness, the suffocating silence. And then, I realize what's happened. The box is no longer a box. It's a prison, and I'm its prisoner. There's no way out. Not now. Not ever. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, breathless, with the feeling that something or someone is pressing down on your chest? That feeling where you can't move, can't breathe, like a heavy weight is pinning you down, and yet when you open your eyes, there's nothing there? I've had it for weeks now, and it's getting worse. Every night, I feel it. That pressure. It's not just a sensation, it's physical. Every night, when I close my eyes, I brace myself for the inevitable. I've learned to expect it, and it's slowly eating away at me. At first, I thought it was just some kind of sleep paralysis, something explainable, something my brain would work through. But after weeks of it, I'm not so sure anymore. There's something more to it. Something real. I don't know when it started, exactly. All I remember is waking up one night, gasping for air, my chest aching as if someone had stepped right on top of me. I sat up, my heart pounding, the room dark and silent. But it wasn't just the darkness that unsettled me, it was the weight on my chest. I was sure I had felt something, someone, there. But when I looked around, there was no one in my room. No one. I brushed it off as a bad dream, a figment of my imagination. But then it happened again. And again. And again. Each time, it felt more real. More present. The weight would settle on me, like invisible hands pressing down. My breath would shorten, and I would lie there, trapped in my own body, unable to scream or move. The sensation would last for what felt like hours, but when I'd finally wake up completely, I would be alone. Just the same dark room. No one there. Except for the heavy feeling lingering in the air. The first time it was just a whisper of pressure, but now it's a constant presence. And it's not just at night anymore. I can feel it during the day, too. The air around me seems thicker, heavier, like it's pressing in on me. When I walk down the hallway, I feel it behind me, just out of reach, as if someone's shadow is trailing me. I thought maybe I was going crazy, that my mind was just playing tricks on me. But no matter how much I try to rationalize it, no matter how much I tell myself it's just stress or exhaustion, the feeling doesn't go away. It's become a part of my life. A suffocating, invisible presence I can't shake. I told my friend Anna about it. She didn't take me seriously at first, just laughed and said it was probably sleep deprivation. But I could see it in her eyes, the moment she started to look at me differently. The moment she realized I wasn't joking. I woke up that night, gasping for air again. The pressure was there, as always, but this time it felt different. Stronger. more insistent. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding, my chest ready to explode from the strain of trying to breathe. But when I looked around, there was no shadow, no figure, no one standing over me. The room was still, silent, as if nothing had happened. I was alone. Or was I? The air was thick with something I couldn't place. I could almost feel it, something moving just beyond my reach. Something that wasn't quite right. I couldn't tell if it was the pressure on my chest, or if it was something else, something worse, creeping in the corners of my mind. I turned over, trying to calm myself down, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the weight didn't let up. It pressed down harder, as if whatever it was had been waiting for me to let my guard down. And then I heard it. A whisper, soft, like a breath on my ear. But there was no one there. I'm here. My breath hitched, my body frozen in place. My eyes shot open, but I couldn't see anything. The whisper didn't make sense, didn't belong, but it was there, hanging in the air like a dark promise. The pressure was unbearable now. My chest felt like it was being crushed under the weight of 1,000 hands. I gasped for air, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. And then, just as quickly as it had come, it stopped. The weight lifted. I lay there in the dark, my body trembling, unsure of what to believe. Had it really happened? Was I losing my mind? Or was there something else, something darker, that was happening to me? I looked around once more, my eyes searching the dark corners of the room. But nothing. No shadow. No figure. Just silence. But the silence felt wrong. It was too quiet. It was too empty. The pressure was still there, deep in my chest, like an unspoken promise. Like something was waiting for me to let my guard down again. And then I realized the truth. It wasn't just in my head anymore. Whatever this was, it had crossed over into the physical world. It was real. And it wasn't going anywhere. The days blurred together now, each one a repetition of the last. I try to go about my daily routine, work, errands, the occasional conversation with Anna, but it's all tinted with the knowledge that when night falls, I'll be back in my bed, waiting for that crushing pressure to return. I can't escape it. The pressure on my chest isn't just confined to the dark hours anymore. It's creeping into the daylight, too. I'll be sitting at my desk at work, staring at the computer screen, and I'll feel it, like a sudden shift in the air. Like someone is standing too close, watching me from just behind my shoulder. And when I turn, there's nothing there. But the feeling lingers. Heavy. Watching. Waiting. It's worse when I'm alone. In my apartment, there are corners that seem darker, even in broad daylight. Sometimes, I'll catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, and I'll turn to find nothing but the ordinary, the mundane. But that doesn't make it feel any less unsettling. It doesn't make the pressure on my chest ease up. That night, I couldn't even wait for bedtime to feel it. As soon as the sun set, it was there, hovering in the air, like an invisible force pushing down on me. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on something, anything else. But the harder I tried, the more intense it became. I tried to read a book, but the words blurred on the page. I couldn't concentrate. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. The silence was thick, and every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, felt louder than it should have. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something. Something terrible. At some point, I found myself pacing the floor. I couldn't sit still. I needed to move. I needed to do something to shake this feeling. But every step felt heavier. Like my feet were dragging through thick mud, like there was something behind me, just out of reach, pulling me back. I walked to the window, trying to get some air. I opened it, and the cold night air rushed in, sharp and biting. It didn't help. If anything, it made the pressure worse. The cold seemed to sink into my skin, seep through my clothes, straight into my bones. I closed the window and turned around. That's why I saw it. For a split second, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me in the dim light. But no! The shape in the corner of the room was too real. Too solid. It was standing there, just behind the chair where I usually sit. A tall figure, dark, featureless. A shadow that shouldn't be there, but was. I froze. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just standing there, as still as death itself. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to get away from it. But my body wouldn't respond. My legs felt like they were cemented to the floor, my chest tightening as if the pressure had just multiplied 1,000 times over. Then, the whisper came again. I've been waiting. The voice was so soft, so quiet, that for a moment, I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. But it didn't matter. It was there. I could feel it, like a cold breeze against my skin, even though the air was still. I wanted to turn away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I couldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes from it. The figure was watching me. I could feel its gaze, even though it had no eyes. It stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, as if it had all the time in the world. The shadows around it seemed to stretch and twist, like they were alive, feeding off its presence. My heart raced, my breath quickened, and the pressure on my chest grew heavier. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. It took another step toward me. The floor creaked beneath its weight. But I didn't hear it. I could only feel it. The weight of it, pushing down, pressing in on me from all sides. I tried to speak. I tried to shout, to ask it what it wanted, but my voice was lost. It wouldn't come. I've always been here, it said, its voice echoing inside my head. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was clear. Loud. Like a drumbeat that reverberated through my skull. You brought me here. The pressure was unbearable now. It was like my chest was being crushed under the weight of 1,000 invisible hands. I gasped for air, but nothing came. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating in the thick, oppressive air. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't move. My body was locked in place, as if it, too, was under the control of whatever this thing was. The figure moved closer, and I could feel its presence surrounding me. I could feel its coldness, its emptiness. There was no warmth, no life, just the darkness that seemed to press against my skin. You can't escape me, it whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, just loud enough to rattle my bones. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't just in my head anymore. Whatever this thing was, it had taken root in the world. It had crossed over from the shadows into the light, and it wasn't leaving. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but there was nothing left in me. My breath came in shallow gasps, my chest still heavy, the weight of the thing pressing down, suffocating me. It was here. And it wasn't going anywhere. And I was trapped. The night passed, though I don't remember much of it. I must have eventually fallen into a restless sleep, but when I woke, it felt as though I had been awake for hours. My body was sore, my muscles tense, as if I had been clenching every part of myself in fear. The pressure on my chest hadn't left, not really. It lingered, like a heavy, suffocating blanket I couldn't shake off. I got up slowly, afraid to move too quickly, afraid that if I did, the thing would come back. That dark presence. The figure in the corner of my room. The one that had waited so long, just to press its weight on me. I stumbled toward the bathroom, trying to clear my head. The harsh light from the overhead bulb seemed too bright, as if the world had been dimmed, and now, in contrast, everything felt painfully sharp. My reflection in the mirror startled me. My eyes were bloodshot, my face pale, my hair disheveled. I looked like I hadn't slept in days, and maybe I hadn't. Maybe I never would again. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping to snap myself out of the fog. But when I looked back up, there was something different. The mirror didn't just reflect me anymore. It reflected something else. A dark shape standing just behind me. I jerked back, heart pounding, but when I spun around, there was nothing. The room was empty. I stared at the mirror for a moment longer, as if waiting for something to change. But nothing did. I told myself it was just my imagination. I had to be imagining it. That's all. I was sleep deprived. My mind was playing tricks on me. But no matter how many times I told myself that, the feeling didn't go away. The pressure never left. I tried to distract myself. I went to work, tried to talk to Anna again, but even her presence felt hollow, like she was just another figure, another shadow, in the ever-growing darkness of my life. I told her nothing about the figure in the corner, nothing about the voice that whispered in my mind. I didn't want her to think I was losing it. But it was getting worse. Everywhere I went, I felt it, an invisible weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. I tried to laugh it off, to pretend I wasn't terrified. But the truth was undeniable. It was suffocating me. The pressure in my chest became constant. At work, at home, in the streets, everywhere. Like something was just behind me, always watching, always waiting for the right moment to strike. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. It was like the world around me was slowly warping, stretching, becoming something I couldn't understand. That night, as I lay in bed, the familiar sensation crept in. The pressure, cold and unyielding, settled on my chest once again. I was too tired to fight it. Too scared to scream. I closed my eyes, hoping it would pass, but it didn't. It only grew stronger. And then it spoke again. You can't hide from me. The voice was low, like a growl, and it filled my mind, vibrating through my skull. The pressure increased, crushing my lungs, squeezing out the air. I gasped, but it wasn't enough. My breath was shallow, my heart racing as if it, too, was being suffocated. I wanted to move, to break free, but my body was frozen. It was like my muscles refused to obey, like they were caught in some kind of trap. The darkness around me deepened, the room shrinking, closing in, until I couldn't see anything but the dark shape looming above me. I am always here, it said, its voice wrapping around me like chains. You brought me here, and now I am your shadow. You will never be free of me. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but no sound came out. My throat was tight, my voice trapped beneath the weight of whatever this was. Suddenly, the pressure lifted, just slightly. Enough to let me breathe, enough to keep me from suffocating, but not enough to escape. The shadow moved closer, and I could feel it in every inch of my skin. It was no longer just an invisible presence. It was real. Flesh and bone and something darker than I could comprehend. And then, just as it had before, it whispered, "You are mine." In that moment, I knew it was true. I was trapped. Not just in my room, not just in my mind, but trapped in a world that was no longer my own. A world where this thing, this presence, ruled, and I was its prisoner. I had no escape, no way out. And as I lay there, gasping for air, I realized that I never would. The days seemed to melt into one another, each one a blur of fear and dread. I woke each morning with the same heavy weight pressing down on my chest, the same suffocating pressure that never quite left. I went through the motions, work, meals, small talk with Anna, but I was hardly present. The thing was always there, lurking, waiting for the nightfall to come again. But something had changed. It wasn't just the nights anymore. The figure, the presence, it was spreading. It was reaching into the corners of my life, like dark tendrils creeping into every waking moment. I couldn't escape it. At work, I'd be sitting in my cubicle, mindlessly typing away, when I'd feel the air grow thick, like it was closing in on me. I'd glance over my shoulder, expecting to see something. To see it. But there was nothing. Nothing but the empty office, the dull buzz of fluorescent lights. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, something, was watching me. "Hey, you okay?" Anna's voice broke through the fog, and I turned to find her standing at my desk, a concerned look on her face. "Yeah," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired, you know. Long week." She didn't seem convinced, but she nodded and walked away. I watched her go, and for a moment, I was grateful. I didn't want to involve her in this. She wouldn't understand. At home, things were even worse. The apartment, my once familiar, safe space, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on me, and every sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, felt like a threat. I started checking the corners of the room, the shadows that seemed to move, just to make sure the figure wasn't there. I couldn't stop myself. But no matter how much I looked, it was always just out of sight. It never fully revealed itself, always staying in the edges of my vision, just beyond my reach. I tried everything to get rid of it. I read articles on how to fight sleep paralysis, how to overcome hallucinations. I tried sleeping with lights on, with music blaring, but nothing helped. The pressure never relented. And then, one night, I saw it again. It was standing in the same spot as before, the corner of my room, just beyond the edge of my bed. The shadows around it were thick, swirling like smoke. It didn't move. It didn't have to. It was enough to just be there, to be. I tried to look away, to pull the blankets over my head, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. It was as if something was holding me in place, forcing me to face it. And then it spoke again. "I've been waiting for you to understand." The voice was soft, but there was a weight behind it. A finality. I felt it deep in my chest, like the words were sinking into my very soul. "I am your burden. Your curse. You cannot run from me. You cannot hide." My chest tightened. The air was thick and suffocating, and it felt like the walls of the room were closing in on me, pushing me closer to the figure. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own body, in my own mind. And then, as it had done before, the pressure increased. I gasped for air, my lungs burning, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't draw enough. The weight on my chest was unbearable, and I felt like I was being crushed from the inside out. The figure moved closer. I could hear its breath, slow and deliberate, in the silence of the room. It was so close now, I could feel its presence, feel the coldness that radiated from it. "You are mine," it whispered, its voice like a dark promise. And then, as if to prove its point, I felt something cold press against my side. Fingers, long, thin, cold fingers, curled around me, just below my ribs. I gasped, trying to jerk away, but the fingers held me tight, impossibly tight, as if they were part of me. I could feel the weight of the thing, its touch, seeping into my skin, my bones, my very being. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was real. It was inside me. "I've always been here," it murmured, its voice now inside my head, echoing with each breath. "And I will never leave." The pressure on my chest became a vice, squeezing, crushing, until I thought my ribs would break. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was drowning in it. And then, as quickly as it had come, the pressure released. I sucked in a desperate breath, feeling the air flood my lungs. The figure was gone. The room was empty, just as it had been before. But I wasn't free. I lay there in the dark, shaking, my chest heaving, my body drenched in sweat. I was alive, but barely. The thing was still with me. I could feel it, even though it wasn't physically there. It had marked me, claimed me. I could hear its voice in my head, always in the back of my mind, whispering its dark promises. It was never going away. I was never going to be free. And I couldn't stop it. I didn't know how much longer I could take this. I didn't know how much more of this darkness I could endure. But one thing was certain, I wasn't the one in control anymore. It was. And it always would be. The days bled into each other, each one a torturous loop that I couldn't escape. I went to work, I came home, and all the while, the suffocating presence followed me. It was always there, just under the surface, like the air was thickening, growing denser around me. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, it would never leave. And I had no strength left to fight. Every night, the pressure would return. It was relentless. Sometimes it would wake me in the middle of the night, pressing down on my chest so hard I couldn't breathe, and sometimes it would be more subtle, creeping in like a whisper, a shadow in the corner of my vision. But it was always there, always watching, always waiting for its moment. One night, I tried to confront it. I had reached a breaking point. My mind was unraveling, and I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't live in a constant state of fear and isolation. If I was going to survive, I needed answers. I needed to know what this thing was, why it had attached itself to me. I stayed up, determined to face it head on. The clock ticked past midnight, and the darkness in my room grew deeper, heavier. I was alone, or at least, I thought I was. I could feel my heart beating faster, the blood pounding in my ears. Every breath felt like a struggle, but I pushed through the panic, forcing myself to stay still, to confront the inevitable. The room was quiet, unnervingly so. The only sound was my own breathing. And then, like a wave crashing over me, the pressure hit. It was sudden. It was crushing. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, and I was left gasping, struggling to breathe. My chest was tight, my ribs aching as if they were about to collapse. But this time, I didn't back down. I forced myself to speak. My voice came out a strangled whisper, but I said it. "Who are you?" The darkness shifted. It stirred, almost as if it were listening, studying me. I could feel it, moving around me, tightening its grip, but I refused to look away. I had to know. I had to understand what had taken over my life. "I am what you cannot escape," the voice answered, its tone smooth and cold. It seemed to come from everywhere, inside my mind, outside my body, reverberating through every inch of the room. "You brought me here," it continued, "with your fear, with your weakness. You summoned me the moment you let yourself break." My blood ran cold. I knew, in some deep part of me, that it was telling the truth. It had been feeding on my fear, growing stronger with every night, every moment I allowed myself to succumb to it. I had given it power, and now I was powerless against it. "You cannot survive without me," it said, and I felt a cold laugh reverberate through my chest, like a sickening vibration. "You cannot exist without the weight, the pressure, the control." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight it, to tear it apart. But my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own mind. The words of the figure were true. I couldn't run anymore. The walls had closed in. It moved closer then, its presence suffocating. I felt its fingers, icy, sharp, brush against my skin, and the pressure on my chest intensified. "You are nothing without me," it whispered, its voice seeping into my very soul. "You will always need me. I am your shadow, your burden, your truth." And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The weight lifted. The pressure eased. The room, once again, felt empty. But I wasn't free. I could still feel it there, lingering, like a scar etched into my mind. The words echoed in my head, over and over again. I couldn't escape it. It wasn't just a presence anymore. It was part of me. A part one couldn't get rid of. A part one would never be able to shake. I lay there, my body trembling, the exhaustion taking over, but even as my mind begged for sleep, I knew it wouldn't help. The darkness would always be with me, lurking in the corners of my thoughts, in every shadow, in every quiet moment. The thing had claimed me. And now, there was no going back. As I closed my eyes, I realized the truth. I had always been its prisoner. Have you ever felt like there's something just beyond the edge of your vision, something that doesn't belong but you can't quite put your finger on it? That feeling, creeping into the back of your mind, that something's waiting for you to notice? Well, that's how it started for me. And let me tell you, it's only gotten worse since. I had just moved into an old house on the outskirts of town, the kind that had that unmistakable, musty smell in the air, the kind that felt like it had stories to tell, if only the walls could speak. It was a fixer-upper, and I figured I'd spend a few months getting everything into shape. A change of scenery. A new start. One day, while exploring the basement, I found something that wasn't part of the house's layout. There was an old door in the far corner, behind a stack of dusty boxes and forgotten furniture. The door was half hidden, as if someone had deliberately tried to forget it. When I pulled it open, I found a narrow stone stairwell leading down into darkness. Curiosity got the best of me. I couldn't resist. I grabbed a flashlight and descended, the air growing colder with each step. The stairs creaked beneath me, groaning like the house was warning me to turn back. But I didn't listen. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a small room. It was barely big enough to move around in, with stone walls and a low, arched ceiling. In the center of the room was a small hole in the floor, no more than a foot wide, surrounded by loose dirt and broken stone. The hole led downward into a narrow tunnel. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. Something about that hole felt wrong. Yet, I couldn't stop myself from crawling toward it. The tunnel seemed to stretch into darkness, but there was something in the air, an electric, charged feeling that made my skin crawl. I didn't hesitate. I crawled through. The first few moments were uneventful, just cold, damp air and the sound of my breathing echoing through the narrow passage. But then, the tunnel started to change. The air grew heavier, thicker, and I began to hear something, faint at first, like distant whispers. But as I continued, the whispers grew louder, clearer. I paused. The whispers weren't just voices. They were words. Words I couldn't understand, but words that felt familiar in some strange, unsettling way. It was as if the tunnel itself was alive, communicating something I wasn't meant to know. I pushed forward, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and fascination. And that's when I felt it, the first real sensation. A cold breath against the back of my neck, like someone was standing just behind me. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Only the tunnel, stretching endlessly into the dark. I told myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. As I continued through the tunnel, time seemed to bend. The farther I went, the more distorted my surroundings became. The walls started to warp and shift, the shadows growing longer and more oppressive. The whispers grew into voices, muffled and incoherent at first, but now almost impatient, as though they were waiting for something. I turned another corner and froze. There, in the middle of the tunnel, was a door. A simple wooden door, but it didn't belong. It wasn't part of the tunnel. It was out of place, as though it had been placed there deliberately by something or someone that wanted to keep it hidden. My heart raced as I approached it, my hand reaching for the doorknob. The moment my fingers brushed the cold metal, a sharp, searing pain shot through my chest, and I stumbled back. The pain wasn't physical. It was like something inside me was being torn open. I gasped, clutching my chest. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I couldn't understand what was happening. But then, I heard it. The whispers were gone, replaced by a low, guttural voice, one I could understand. "Turn back," it said. The words were so clear, so chilling, that they stopped me in my tracks. I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me. Something was wrong. This tunnel, this place, none of it felt real anymore. It felt like it was bending the very fabric of reality itself. I stumbled backward, but it was too late. The walls of the tunnel seemed to close in around me, the air thickening, becoming almost suffocating. I turned, trying to find the way back, but the tunnel had changed. The path I had crawled through was gone. The walls were shifting, sliding in on themselves. The very ground beneath me trembled. Something was coming. I could feel it. The tunnel was alive, and it was angry. I ran, but the space around me seemed to stretch on forever. I couldn't escape. The whispers were louder now, rising to a deafening roar, the voices growing more frantic, more desperate. I didn't know where the tunnel ended, or if it even had an end. But I knew one thing: whatever was waiting at the other end of it, I wasn't ready to face it. And as I sprinted through the ever-changing passage, I realized I might never leave this place. I might never find my way back to the world I knew. The tunnel had claimed me. I don't remember how I made it back to the room with the tunnel's entrance. One moment, I was running, my heart pounding in my chest, and the next, I was there, breathing heavily, collapsed against the cold stone walls, my mind reeling from the terror of what I had just experienced. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd gone too deep into the tunnel. Maybe my mind had simply conjured up those voices. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had experienced wasn't just a trick of my imagination. It was real, and it was waiting for me to return. I sat there for what felt like hours, my hands trembling as I tried to steady my breathing. The air in the basement was thick and stale, and I could taste the dust in the back of my throat. My eyes kept darting to the hole in the floor, as though the tunnel was calling to me, beckoning me to come back. But I couldn't go back, not after what had happened. I slowly got to my feet, my legs unsteady, and I made my way to the stairs. But before I could leave the basement, I stopped. There, in the corner of the room, was something new. A shadow. A figure. It was faint at first, barely visible in the dim light, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw it more clearly. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a shape, a human-like figure standing motionless in the corner. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't seen anyone when I first entered the basement. And now, there was a figure, silent, still, and watching me. It wasn't moving, but I could feel its gaze on me, cold and calculating. I should have screamed. I should have run. But something kept me frozen in place, a mixture of terror and disbelief rooting me to the spot. The figure was dressed in a dark cloak, its face hidden in the shadow of the hood. I couldn't make out any details, just the vague outline of a person standing there as though waiting for me to acknowledge them. Then, the voice came again. Not the whispering from the tunnel, but a voice that seemed to echo in my mind. Clear. Deliberate. You shouldn't have come back. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The words felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, and my body refused to obey. Leave now, the voice continued. You're not meant to be here. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, its presence suffocating the air around me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. And then, something shifted. The figure's head turned slightly, as if it were considering me. The air around it shimmered, like heat waves rising from the pavement on a hot day, distorting everything. And suddenly, I felt it, the cold, sharp presence of something ancient, something far beyond what I could comprehend. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble, just barely noticeable, but enough to make me feel like the foundation of the house was crumbling. What did you find? The voice asked, a strange mixture of curiosity and warning. The question echoed in my mind, lingering long after the words had faded. What had I found? The tunnel? The darkness? The reality that twisted and bent around me? I didn't have the answers, and I couldn't even find the words to speak. I could only stare at the figure, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't mean to. I finally managed to whisper. I didn't know. But the figure said nothing more. It only stood there, silent and unmoving, as though it had already passed judgment on me. And then, the air shifted again. I couldn't explain it, but something felt different. The room felt smaller, more oppressive. The shadows seemed to grow longer, as if they were reaching for me, stretching out in unnatural ways. I took a step back, my foot scraping against the cold stone floor, and that's when I heard it. The faintest of sounds. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle, like something shifting, something moving, just out of sight. I turned toward the source of the sound, and that's when I saw it. The tunnel. The hole in the floor that I had tried to forget. It was wider now. Deeper. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as though the tunnel itself had grown, fed by something hidden beneath the surface. I couldn't look away. The pull was too strong, the curiosity too overwhelming. But I knew what was waiting for me. I had felt it before. The darkness. The presence. Something in the tunnel was changing. It was no longer just a passage through the earth. It had become something else, a doorway. A threshold to something I wasn't meant to understand. The figure in the corner of the room was gone now. Whether it had vanished or simply moved away, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that the house, this place, was no longer the same. The tunnel had changed everything. I had to make a choice. Walk away and forget about what I had seen, or descend back into the darkness and find out what waited on the other side. I stood at the edge of the hole, the room silent around me, my breath shallow as I looked down into the inky blackness below. And as I took one last look at the place I had once called home, I knew that my life was no longer mine to control. The tunnel had claimed me, and whatever it held, whatever it had become, was waiting. The air felt heavier now, like something pressing down on me, urging me toward the tunnel. I stood at the edge, the darkness below swallowing the light from the small lamp in my hand. I could feel it, a pull, faint at first, but growing stronger with every passing second. Something was calling me, and despite the terror gnawing at my insides, I knew I had no choice but to go. But even as I took my first step toward the opening, something in the back of my mind screamed for me to stop. Every instinct told me to turn away, to leave this place behind and never look back. But I couldn't. I didn't know why, but I was already too far gone. The cold air from the tunnel sent a shiver down my spine as I leaned over the edge. It was as if the darkness itself had a texture, soft yet suffocating, like a thick fog wrapping itself around you, pulling you in deeper. I took another step, this time closer to the edge. My breath was shallow, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, almost painfully so. I didn't want to go any further, but the darkness, it felt like it was pulling me in. And no matter how hard I tried to resist, my body seemed to move on its own. The faint rustling sound returned, this time louder, like something was scratching against the stone walls just out of sight. I stiffened, my body freezing in place, but I couldn't look away. I had to know. I crouched down, slowly lowering myself into the hole, feeling the stone against my hands as I went. My feet touched something soft, damp earth, and I gasped, feeling the floor beneath me give way slightly. The moment I was fully inside, the air seemed to change. It grew colder, and the silence became oppressive, swallowing up any noise I made. My footsteps echoed unnervingly, and as I moved forward, the tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, its path twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. It was as though the space itself was alive, shifting around me. The further I went, the more disorienting it became. The walls of the tunnel seemed to pulse, as if breathing. I would swear that at times, the darkness ahead of me would flicker, revealing something or someone in the distance, but when I blinked, it was gone. Each time I tried to focus, the shapes would shift again, leaving only the hollow sound of my own breathing in the dead silence. And then I heard it, the softest whisper. It was faint at first, but it grew clearer with every step I took. Words. Scrambled, unintelligible, yet somehow familiar. Like an old memory, something I should have known but couldn't quite grasp. You shouldn't have come. The voice wasn't the same as the one in the basement. This voice was lower, more guttural, as though it came from the depths of the earth itself. I paused, my heart skipping a beat. There was no one else here. No one to speak. The voice couldn't have come from anyone in this tunnel. But it had, there was no mistaking it. I took another step, the whispers intensifying, growing louder, like 1,000 voices, all speaking at once. I wanted to stop, to turn back, but I couldn't. The tunnel beckoned, and my feet continued to move, as if they were being controlled by some unseen force. The walls began to feel wrong. The smooth stone beneath my hands became jagged, sharp, as though the tunnel had been carved into something that wasn't natural. And then the ground beneath me shifted again, making my balance falter. I almost fell, but I caught myself against the wall. That's when I noticed it. The light. A dim, flickering light up ahead. It wasn't much, just a weak glow that seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. But it was enough to make me quicken my pace, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity. As I neared the source of the light, the air grew heavier, almost suffocating. I could feel it now, the presence. It was like something was waiting just ahead, something with a mind of its own. The tunnel wasn't just a path. It was alive, aware, and it had noticed me. I reached the end of the tunnel, but instead of the small, cramped room I expected, the walls opened up, revealing a vast, cavernous space. It was nothing like I had imagined. The ceiling stretched high above me, disappearing into a dark void, and the floor was covered in what looked like old, crumbling stone. The flickering light came from a large, circular symbol etched into the center of the cavern floor. It was glowing faintly, casting strange shadows across the walls. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening as I examined the symbol. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, an intricate pattern, twisted and complex, as though it had been drawn by hands not human. Then, as I reached out to touch it, a loud crack echoed through the cavern, and the ground trembled beneath me. The light from the symbol grew brighter, more intense, until it became blinding. I shielded my eyes, but I could still feel it, searing into my mind. My body tensed, as if it was being pulled toward it, and the whispering grew louder, frantic now. You shouldn't have come, the voices cried, overlapping in a chorus of desperation. And then, everything went black. I didn't know how long I was unconscious. It could have been seconds, or hours, but when I woke, the cavern was silent. The symbol was gone. The light had vanished. But something was left behind. A single, blackened handprint scorched into the stone. And with it, the chilling realization that I had crossed a line. I had entered something I wasn't meant to understand. And now, there was no going back. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The silence that had followed the blinding light felt unnatural, too heavy. The air, once cold and suffocating, was now still, as though even the wind was afraid to disturb whatever had just happened. I looked around, but the cavern felt even more unfamiliar than before. The walls, once jagged and rough, now seemed to melt into a smooth, dark expanse, stretching infinitely. There was no sign of the tunnel I had come through, no trace of how I had even entered. It was as if the space had swallowed me whole and erased every trace of my presence. My body tensed as I instinctively took a step back, my foot hitting something hard on the ground. I glanced down, expecting debris, but instead, I saw a dark shape at my feet. It was a stone, but unlike any I had seen before. It was polished, smooth, and oddly warm, like it had absorbed the heat of the light that had consumed the cavern moments before. I reached down and picked it up. The moment my fingers wrapped around it, I felt a jolt of electricity shoot up my arm, like a sudden shock of energy coursing through my veins. The stone pulsed in my hand, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. It was warm, but now the warmth felt alive, unnervingly so. I tossed the stone aside, but it didn't land where I expected. It hovered for a brief moment, spinning in midair before crashing back to the ground with a soft thud. What the hell was happening? I backed away, the hairs on my neck standing on end. The whispering had stopped, but I could still feel its presence, like something lurking just beyond my sight, waiting for me to make a mistake. The entire cavern seemed to close in on me, and my mind raced as I tried to make sense of everything. How had I gotten here? Why was everything so distorted? And what had that light been? I needed to get out. The need to flee, to escape whatever I had triggered, overwhelmed me. I turned, searching for an exit, but there was nothing. No tunnel, no door, no way out. Just an endless expanse of stone and shadow. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound, like nails dragging against stone. The noise was distant at first, but it grew closer with every passing second. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest as the sound intensified, becoming more pronounced, more desperate. It was coming from behind me, from deep within the cavern, and I had no choice but to turn and face it. As I did, I saw something move. A shadow. A shape darting across the far wall of the cavern. At first, it looked like a person, a figure cloaked in darkness, but as my eyes focused, I realized it wasn't human. Its form was too fluid, too distorted, shifting in ways that didn't make sense. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My body went rigid, frozen in place as the figure moved toward me, faster now, its presence growing stronger with every second. The scraping sound continued, now accompanied by a low, guttural growl that echoed through the walls of the cavern. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. My pulse quickened, and I could feel the walls pressing in around me, the air thick with dread. Every step I took felt like it was pulling me deeper into the unknown. The figure was getting closer, its form becoming more solid with every passing moment. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long, like they were made of darkness itself, and its eyes, when they finally met mine, were hollow pits, deep and endless. It was alive, but not in any way I could understand. "Leave," it whispered, its voice a low rasp that crawled under my skin. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, not knowing where I was going, but knowing I couldn't stay. My feet pounded against the stone floor, the echo of my own steps filling the cavern, but the shadow, whatever it was right behind me. I could feel it, could sense it reaching out, trying to pull me back into the darkness. The ground beneath me trembled, and I stumbled, my legs giving way as I fell to the floor. The stone cut into my palms, but I didn't care. I scrambled to my feet and tried to run again, but my legs felt like they were moving through thick mud, weighed down by some invisible force. The shadow was closer now, its cold presence seeping into my bones. I could hear its breath, slow and measured, as though it were savoring my fear. I ran faster, but it was no use. The tunnel had disappeared, and I had nowhere to go. That's when I heard it again, the whisper. Too late. And just like that, the world around me shifted. The cavern vanished, replaced by a cold, empty space. I couldn't see anything, couldn't feel anything, and then, just as suddenly, I was back in the basement. My heart was pounding, my body drenched in sweat. My legs felt weak, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. It was the basement. It was familiar, but it wasn't. I looked around, disoriented. The walls seemed to twist and shift, the shadows playing tricks on my mind. The tunnel, the cavern, had it all been real? Or was it just another illusion? I couldn't tell anymore. But the feeling was there, an undeniable sense that I hadn't escaped, that whatever had followed me in the darkness was still with me, waiting. The air felt suffocating as I sat there, drenched in cold sweat, my breathing shallow. I looked around the basement, trying to convince myself that everything was normal. But I knew it wasn't. The shadows were darker than they should have been, moving in ways they shouldn't. The silence was too deep, too thick, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I pushed myself to my feet, trembling, and glanced at the small door that led to the stairs. I hadn't been up there in what felt like days. The thought of going back to the world above, the world I once knew, seemed impossible now. I didn't trust it. Whatever I had seen, whatever had followed me into this place, had twisted everything I had once taken for granted. But where else could I go? The basement was becoming a prison. The walls seemed to close in on me, narrowing with every breath I took, until I felt like there was no escape. I took a step toward the stairs, my hand gripping the cold banister for support. My footsteps echoed in the silent basement, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The house felt wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. The air, the walls, even the floors beneath my feet, they were no longer just the foundation of a home. They felt like something else. Something older. Something waiting. Then I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like nails on stone. The same sound I had heard in the cavern, only now it was much closer, much more tangible. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. It was coming from the darkness at the far end of the basement. I knew I shouldn't go toward it. I knew it was a mistake, a dangerous one. But my legs moved of their own accord, drawing me forward, as though some invisible force was pulling me to the source of the sound. The closer I got, the stronger the feeling of dread became. It was almost like the shadows themselves were alive, pulsating with a dark energy. I reached the corner, my hands trembling as I reached for the light switch. But before I could flick it on, I felt something cold brush against my neck. A chill ran down my spine, and I spun around, my heart racing. There was nothing. Just the oppressive darkness, stretching into infinity. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and pressed my back against the wall. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as the tension in the air grew thicker, heavier. Something was watching me. Something was waiting. I heard the scraping again. This time, it was louder. Closer. More deliberate. Then, I saw it. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall, dark, and almost liquid in form, like it was made of the very darkness that surrounded it. It didn't move like a person, but more like something formless, something that was bending and twisting the space around it. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed faintly, two deep pits of blackness that swallowed all light around them. It was the same thing from the cavern. The same thing that had whispered to me, that had hunted me through the shifting tunnels. And now it was here. The air grew colder still as it took a step toward me. I could feel its presence in every fiber of my being, an overwhelming force that suffocated me from the inside out. I tried to back away, but my body refused to move. My legs were frozen, my mind trapped in a whirlwind of panic. Too late, the whisper echoed through the basement again, its voice distant yet strangely close, like a memory lingering in the air. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt as if it was caving in, like an invisible weight was pressing down on me, crushing the life out of me. The figure reached toward me, its long, shadowy limbs stretching unnaturally, and I couldn't look away. I wanted to scream, to run, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was tight, as if something was stopping me from making a sound. It was then that I realized this wasn't just a figure. It wasn't just an apparition. It was me. Somehow, some twisted part of my mind had created it. I had summoned it into existence, dragged it from the depths of the tunnel and into the real world. This wasn't a nightmare. This was something far worse. This was the result of whatever had happened when I stepped into that tunnel, when I let myself slip into whatever strange reality it had offered. The figure's hand, no, my hand, reached for my face, and I closed my eyes, bracing for the touch. But it never came. Instead, there was nothing. I opened my eyes to find myself back in the basement, standing alone in the dim light. The figure, the shadows, the feeling of being hunted, it was all gone. But I knew then that it wasn't over. The darkness had followed me, seeped into my reality, and no matter how far I ran, no matter how many times I tried to escape, it would always be there, waiting in the corners of my mind. The tunnel was never just a place. It was a doorway, one I could never close. And as I stood there, shivering in the quiet, I understood. I wasn't just trapped in this house. I was trapped in a world that had twisted itself around me. A world where the boundaries between the real and the unreal no longer existed. And I had no way out. Have you ever woken up and found something on your body, something that wasn't there before? Something that you don't remember happening? I didn't believe in strange occurrences until it happened to me. At first, it was small, barely noticeable, a faint mark across my arm, no bigger than a scratch. But over time, they started appearing in places I couldn't explain, and they began to feel wrong. The first one came one night after a particularly strange dream. I woke up in my small apartment, cold sweat clinging to my skin. My fingers traced over the surface of my forearm, and I felt it, a raised line, rough and uneven, like a scar that had been there for years. But I didn't remember injuring myself. In fact, I hadn't even noticed it before. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, squinting at the mark, trying to make sense of it. It was shaped like a symbol, something I couldn't recognize, something old and jagged. I told myself it was just a random scratch. Maybe I had done it in my sleep, I thought. But as days passed, more appeared. The second one showed up on my neck, the third across my chest. Each one was different, each one looked like it belonged to a language I couldn't read. They seemed to appear overnight, without reason or explanation. And every time I found another scar, the feeling in my chest grew heavier. At first, I tried to ignore them. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was sleep deprived. But soon, the marks began to form a pattern. The deeper I looked into them, the more I felt a strange compulsion to trace them with my fingers, to somehow understand their meaning. The marks weren't just on the surface of my skin, they felt alive, as if they were growing beneath the surface, stretching, reaching, pulling me into something I didn't understand. It wasn't just the symbols themselves that unnerved me. It was the feeling they left behind, like the world was shifting, as though I was being pulled into something I couldn't escape. I couldn't sleep. The weight of the marks, the pressure of something unseen pushing against me, made every moment feel like a struggle. It wasn't just my body that was changing, my mind was too. I began to feel as though I was being watched, that something was following me, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. Every noise, every shadow seemed to bring the same dreadful sensation that I wasn't alone. And then, the third night came. I woke up, but this time, something was different. The room was darker, colder. The shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should have, twisting into strange shapes. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and immediately felt the weight of the marks on my skin. They were burning now, not physically, but in a way that was worse, like they were pulling at my very soul. I reached for the light switch beside my bed, but before I could flip it, the shadows shifted. I could hear faint whispers, like voices in a language I didn't understand. They seemed to come from all directions, closing in around me. The whispers grew louder, but I couldn't make out the words. I was paralyzed, unable to move, unable to breathe. It felt like the air itself had thickened, pressing down on me with an unbearable weight. Then, in the corner of the room, I saw it. A figure, barely visible, standing in the dark. It was tall, its form flickering like a shadow caught in the corner of my eye. I blinked, trying to focus, but it was gone. Just like that. As if it had never been there. But I knew it had been. The air felt charged with its presence, and I could feel it watching me, waiting. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. The next morning, I found another scar. This one was across my wrist, jagged and deep, the symbol unlike any I had seen before. And this time, it wasn't just a mark on my skin. It felt real. Like it had been carved there by something much older, much more powerful than anything I could comprehend. The marks were changing me, drawing me deeper into whatever this was. I tried to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening, but I could feel it, a presence, always just behind me, always watching. Something that was tied to these scars, to these symbols. Something that wanted me, that needed me to understand. But I didn't want to understand. I didn't want to know where these marks were leading, or what they would do to me. The question lingered in my mind, was I just losing my mind? Or was this something much darker? Something that had always been there, waiting for me to notice? I didn't know. And maybe I never would. But one thing was certain, whatever it wasn't going to let me go. The second scar appeared just a few days later, right across my chest. I woke up in the morning with an unfamiliar sting, like something sharp had grazed my skin during the night. The moment I looked down, my heart skipped a beat. It was exactly like the others, strange, jagged, like something had carved it into me with a cruel precision. But there was something different about this one. The mark seemed deeper, more deliberate. It didn't just sit on the surface of my skin, it felt embedded, as if it had always been there, as though it had grown with me, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I stood frozen in front of the bathroom mirror, my fingers trembling as they traced the scar. The sensation was unlike anything I had ever felt. The air around me felt thick, pressing down on my chest, like it was harder to breathe. For a moment, I thought I might collapse from the weight of it all, but I took a slow breath and stepped back. There had to be an explanation. Maybe I was sleepwalking, maybe I was scratching myself in my sleep, but it didn't explain the strange symbols. Symbols that felt too intentional to be the result of some random accident. I was alone in the apartment, the only sound the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The familiar silence of the morning felt oppressive now, as if the walls were closing in on me. I tried to ignore the feeling that there was something else in the room, something invisible, lurking just out of reach. I quickly grabbed my shirt, covering the mark, hoping to shut out the unease that had settled in my gut. The day passed slowly, but my mind kept returning to the scar, to the odd sensation that something was watching me. Something not quite human. That evening, after work, I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. Maybe a change of scenery would help me forget the strange events that were unfolding around me. I headed to the park, the air crisp with the early evening chill. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their bare branches stretching like skeletal fingers against the sky. I was hoping the peaceful surroundings would calm my nerves, but the opposite happened. The longer I walked, the more I felt the weight of the marks on my skin, each one a reminder of something I didn't understand. It felt like they were pulling at me, guiding me towards something I wasn't ready to face. As I walked, I began to notice the subtle changes around me. The rustling of the leaves sounded louder than usual, almost as if they were whispering something I couldn't quite make out. A distant sound, like a low hum, buzzed in my ears, but when I stopped and tried to listen more closely, it faded. I shook my head, trying to focus. I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was the constant pressure of the scars, distorting my perception of the world around me. I continued walking, trying to shake the unease, but it was no use. Something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it in my bones. The air around me felt different, heavy, charged with a strange energy. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. When I turned the corner to head back home, I was startled to see a man standing at the edge of the park. He was just standing there, still, his back to me. I could only make out his silhouette against the fading light, but something about him seemed off. It wasn't his appearance, it was the way he stood, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. I tried to ignore him and kept walking, but as I passed him, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder once, just to confirm he was still there, but he wasn't. The space where he had stood was empty. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart racing. Had I imagined him? Maybe I had. But the feeling of being watched, of being followed, lingered. I quickened my pace, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Something was definitely wrong. I didn't even stop to unlock the door when I got back to my apartment. I rushed inside, locking it behind me. I leaned against the door for a moment, trying to catch my breath. The weight in my chest was unbearable, like a pressure I couldn't escape. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the unsettling thoughts from my mind. But the scars were real. And they were growing deeper. That night, I couldn't sleep. The feeling of something watching me, something just beyond my reach, never left. I lay awake in bed, my body tense, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the darkness to bring more signs, more marks, more answers. Around midnight, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. But when I awoke, I found a new scar on my leg, this one larger, covering almost the entirety of my shin. The symbol on it was more intricate than the others. I stared at it, mesmerized and terrified at the same time. I tried to stand up, but as I moved, a sharp pain shot through my leg. It wasn't physical, it was more like an invisible force had gripped me, pulling me down. I fell to the floor, my body heavy, like something was keeping me anchored to the ground. A sound, faint but distinct, echoed through the apartment. It was a soft scratching noise, like something or someone was clawing at the walls. I froze, listening. It was coming from behind the walls, from the very corners of the room. The noise was soft, but unmistakable. Something was moving. I pulled myself up, my head spinning. I had to get out of there. But as I reached for the door, I felt a cold gust of wind rush through the room, even though the windows were closed. And in that instant, I knew. The marks on my body weren't just scars. They were a doorway to something much darker. And no matter how hard I tried to escape, they would follow me, pulling me deeper into whatever world they were tied to. I had to find out what they meant. But at the same time, I feared the answer. What if I wasn't ready to know? What if the truth was far worse than I could imagine? The next few days blurred together. Each morning, I woke to find new scars. The marks were never in the same place, never the same shape, but they were always there. Each one felt like it had been carved into me with precision and malice, as though someone was marking me for a reason. I couldn't escape them. No matter how hard I tried to ignore the growing pattern on my skin, they would reappear, spreading, multiplying. But the marks weren't the only thing changing. Something in the apartment had shifted. The air felt heavier, denser, like I was breathing through water. Every small sound seemed amplified, every shadow more pronounced. I could hear the rustling of something in the corners of my apartment, and I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or if something was actually moving in the dark. One evening, I returned from work to find the apartment colder than usual. I hadn't left the windows open, and yet the chill in the air felt unnatural, almost deliberate. The walls seemed to hum with an invisible energy, vibrating just beneath the surface. I rubbed my arms to warm myself, but it didn't help. The cold seeped into my bones. The lights flickered as I walked into the kitchen, and I froze, staring at the refrigerator. I could have sworn I heard something, like a low whisper, barely audible. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, just the hum of the refrigerator, the beating of my heart in my ears. I tried to shrug off the feeling of being watched, but it lingered, hanging over me like a thick fog. I was convinced something was in the apartment, something that had been there all along, waiting for me to notice. That night, I locked all the doors and windows, something I hadn't done before. I had always felt safe in my own home, but now, with each new scar, I couldn't shake the sensation of being haunted. I had to find out what was happening to me, why my skin was changing, why these symbols were appearing. I decided to do some research. I spent hours combing through online forums, reading anything I could about mysterious markings, symbols, and the strange sensation of being followed. But nothing I found made sense. There were stories of people who claimed to be cursed, others who spoke of ancient rituals and occult practices. But none of it felt relevant. None of it explained what I was going through. As the night wore on, I found myself growing more desperate, scrolling through page after page of meaningless information. I needed answers. At some point, I came across a forum post that caught my eye. It was short, almost cryptic. "The scars will mark you. They will lead you to the place where you are meant to be. Follow them." I stared at the words for a long time, feeling a shiver run down my spine. It didn't make sense, but something about it rang true. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that the scars weren't random. They were guiding me, pulling me towards something. something I had to find. The room felt colder now, the walls pressing in on me. I glanced over at the corner of the room where the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. I shook my head, trying to shake off the sensation, but it was getting harder to tell where reality ended and the madness began. I had to leave. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, but before I could open it, I heard it again, scratching. This time, it was louder, closer. My heart raced as I stood frozen, the sound coming from behind the walls. It was as if something, or someone, was clawing its way through the plaster. The air was thick now, suffocating, pressing down on me. I could feel the weight of it in my chest, making it harder to breathe. My hands trembled as I reached for the door again, but just as I was about to twist the knob, the scratching stopped. Everything went eerily quiet. I turned the handle and stepped outside, my body tense, every muscle on edge. The hallway of my building was empty, bathed in the dull yellow glow of the hallway lights. But something felt different. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, watching me, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That something was following me, just out of sight. I quickened my pace, heading toward the stairwell, but as I descended, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate steps echoing in the otherwise silent building. I spun around, but the stairwell was empty. I was losing my mind. I kept moving, my footsteps quickening as I descended into the basement of the building where I had discovered the tunnel. When I reached the basement door, I hesitated. The last time I had gone down there, I had felt something shift, something change in the air. But this time, it felt different. The door was slightly ajar, as if waiting for me. I pushed it open slowly and stepped into the darkened basement. The air was thick with dust and dampness, the smell of old concrete and mold filling my nostrils. The tunnel, the one I had discovered all those nights ago, seemed to beckon me. It was no longer just a place, it had become an entity, a living thing that was calling to me. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The cool darkness wrapped around me like a shroud, and the moment I crossed the threshold, I knew I had made a mistake. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air growing colder with each step I took. The scratching sound returned, louder now, closer, as if something was chasing me. But there was no turning back now. I had to find the answers. I had to know what these marks meant. What was happening to me? And most of all, I had to understand the place I was walking toward, the place where the tunnel led. The place that was waiting for me. I moved deeper into the tunnel, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The walls seemed to close in around me, growing narrower with every turn. The air was colder, thick with something that felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. The scratching grew louder, now unmistakable, as though something was moving just behind me, following me, waiting for the moment when I would stop. I couldn't stop. The tunnel was like a force, pulling me forward, pushing me deeper into its claustrophobic embrace. Every step I took felt like it was tearing something from me, like it was extracting my very soul. And then, I saw it. A faint glow ahead, soft and ethereal, like the light of a distant star. It seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat. My legs moved on their own, faster now, drawn to the light as if it were the only thing keeping me grounded. I had to reach it. It was my only way out. But as I neared the light, something changed. The tunnel, once endless and winding, now felt smaller, more suffocating. The walls began to close in around me, the space tightening like a vice. The light, too, began to flicker, its steady pulse becoming erratic. The shadows stretched and distorted, becoming twisted shapes that seemed to leer at me, mocking me, telling me that I should turn back. But I didn't. I couldn't. I reached the end of the tunnel, and there it was, an archway. The light emanated from beyond it, spilling into the space in front of me, so blindingly bright that I had to squint. But something about the archway felt wrong. It wasn't just light, it was an overwhelming presence, something beyond human comprehension. And then I heard it again. The scratching. But this time, it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from beyond the archway. I stopped, my heart racing in my chest. The sound was sharp now, desperate, like nails scraping across metal. It was so loud it almost drowned out everything else. I was frozen in place, unable to move. Something was waiting for me on the other side, and it wasn't just the light. I didn't want to go through. I didn't want to face whatever was waiting, but the pull was stronger than ever. The scars on my body, the marks that had been appearing for days, were burning now. The symbols had become raw, etched into my skin like fire, searing through the flesh. It was like they were calling to me, like they were the key to everything. With a shaky breath, I stepped forward, crossing the threshold. The light swallowed me whole. For a moment, there was nothing but white. A blinding, searing light that overwhelmed my senses. I could feel the air change, feel something shifting around me, pulling at my mind. And then, just as quickly, the light receded, leaving me standing in a place that felt wrong. I was no longer in the tunnel. I was in a room, a vast, empty room with walls that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was thick and still, like a place that had not been touched by time. There were no windows, no doors, just endless walls and a floor made of cold, smooth stone. And there, in the center of the room, was a figure. It was cloaked in shadow, its form indistinct, shifting. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I stared, I realized it was moving, its shape constantly changing, like it didn't belong to this world. Its presence was suffocating, like it was pulling the very air from my lungs. I tried to speak, but no words came. My throat was tight, and the words felt trapped inside me, suffocated by the weight of the room. The figure took a step forward, and with that, the room seemed to shift, the walls bending and warping as if they were alive. My skin prickled with the sensation of something cold, something ancient, pressing down on me. The air became thick with an unbearable pressure, like I was being crushed by the weight of the world. Then the figure spoke. Its voice was not a voice at all, but a whisper, no, a command, a feeling that pierced through my mind like a knife. "Do you know what you've done?" it asked. The words hung in the air, thick with an unbearable gravity. I didn't answer. I couldn't. "You've awakened it," the figure continued, its form shifting, contorting as if it was trying to reveal something I wasn't supposed to see. "You've brought it into this world. The scars, they are the mark of your choice." I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. My skin burned with the weight of its words, each scar pulsing like a warning, like a reminder of what I had done, of what I had unleashed. The figure stepped closer, its face still hidden in the shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me, piercing into my very soul. "You can't run from it," it whispered, its voice growing darker, more insistent. "It is already inside you. You've opened the door. Now, there is no turning back." I staggered back, my mind racing, but my body refused to obey. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls seemed to close in around me, pressing tighter with each passing second. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was drowning in this place, trapped by the very thing I had sought to understand. The figure reached out, its hand cold and trembling, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was the end. I had walked into a place where the scars didn't just mark my skin, they marked my fate. And it was too late to turn back now. I moved deeper into the tunnel, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The walls seemed to close in around me, growing narrower with every turn. The air was colder, thick with something that felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. The scratching grew louder, now unmistakable, as though something was moving just behind me, following me, waiting for the moment when I would stop. I couldn't stop. The tunnel was like a force, pulling me forward, pushing me deeper into its claustrophobic embrace. Every step I took felt like it was tearing something from me, like it was extracting my very soul. And then I saw it. A faint glow ahead, soft and ethereal, like the light of a distant star. It seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat. My legs moved on their own, faster now, drawn to the light as if it were the only thing keeping me grounded. I had to reach it. It was my only way out. But as I neared the light, something changed. The tunnel, once endless and winding, now felt smaller, more suffocating. The walls began to close in around me, the space tightening like a vice. The light, too, began to flicker, its steady pulse becoming erratic. The shadows stretched and distorted, becoming twisted shapes that seemed to leer at me, mocking me, telling me that I should turn back. But I didn't. I couldn't. I reached the end of the tunnel, and there it was, an archway. The light emanated from beyond it, spilling into the space in front of me, so blindingly bright that I had to squint. But something about the archway felt wrong. It wasn't just light, it was an overwhelming presence, something beyond human comprehension. And then I heard it again. The scratching. But this time, it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from beyond the archway. I stopped, my heart racing in my chest. The sound was sharp now, desperate, like nails scraping across metal. It was so loud it almost drowned out everything else. I was frozen in place, unable to move. Something was waiting for me on the other side, and it wasn't just the light. I didn't want to go through. I didn't want to face whatever was waiting, but the pull was stronger than ever. The scars on my body, the marks that had been appearing for days, were burning now. The symbols had become raw, etched into my skin like fire, searing through the flesh. It was like they were calling to me, like they were the key to everything. With a shaky breath, I stepped forward, crossing the threshold. The light swallowed me whole. For a moment, there was nothing but white. A blinding, searing light that overwhelmed my senses. I could feel the air change, feel something shifting around me, pulling at my mind. And then, just as quickly, the light receded, leaving me standing in a place that felt wrong. I was no longer in the tunnel. I was in a room, a vast, empty room with walls that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was thick and still, like a place that had not been touched by time. There were no windows, no doors, just endless walls and a floor made of cold, smooth stone. And there, in the center of the room, was a figure. It was cloaked in shadow, its form indistinct, shifting. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I stared, I realized it was moving, its shape constantly changing, like it didn't belong to this world. Its presence was suffocating, like it was pulling the very air from my lungs. I tried to speak, but no words came. My throat was tight, and the words felt trapped inside me, suffocated by the weight of the room. The figure took a step forward, and with that, the room seemed to shift, the walls bending and warping as if they were alive. My skin prickled with the sensation of something cold, something ancient, pressing down on me. The air became thick with an unbearable pressure, like I was being crushed by the weight of the world. Then the figure spoke. Its voice was not a voice at all, but a whisper, no, a command, a feeling that pierced through my mind like a knife. "Do you know what you've done?" it asked. The words hung in the air, thick with an unbearable gravity. I didn't answer. I couldn't. "You've awakened it," the figure continued, its form shifting, contorting as if it was trying to reveal something I wasn't supposed to see. "You've brought it into this world. The scars, they are the mark of your choice." I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. My skin burned with the weight of its words, each scar pulsing like a warning, like a reminder of what I had done, of what I had unleashed. The figure stepped closer, its face still hidden in the shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me, piercing into my very soul. "You can't run from it," it whispered, its voice growing darker, more insistent. "It is already inside you. You've opened the door. Now, there is no turning back." I staggered back, my mind racing, but my body refused to obey. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls seemed to close in around me, pressing tighter with each passing second. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was drowning in this place, trapped by the very thing I had sought to understand. The figure reached out, its hand cold and trembling, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was the end. I had walked into a place where the scars didn't just mark my skin, they marked my fate. And it was too late to turn back now. The figure's hand reached closer, fingers stretching, its touch like ice against my skin. I could feel the cold seep through my clothes, straight into my bones, as if it was not just touching me but pulling something out of me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse right there in the middle of the room, consumed by the darkness surrounding me. But then, the room shifted again. The walls, which had once been so oppressive, now seemed to stretch outward, creating more space around me. The light that had engulfed me now flickered, revealing faint outlines of shapes in the corners of the room, shadows of figures standing still, watching me. There was a hum in the air now, almost like a chorus of whispers, voices too faint to understand but too numerous to ignore. The figure's hand stopped just short of touching my skin, lingering in the air, and for a brief moment, I thought it was waiting for me to react. My heart raced, my mind spinning with fear and confusion. What had I done? What was happening to me? But I couldn't answer. I didn't even know what to say. My thoughts were scattered, fragmented, trying to make sense of the impossible. The figure spoke again, but this time its voice was not a whisper. It was a roar, a deep, reverberating sound that shook the very air around me. "You cannot escape yourself." The words tore through me like a physical force, leaving me breathless and disoriented. The scars on my body, those symbols that had appeared on my skin, burned with a newfound intensity, and I doubled over in pain. The shapes twisted and writhed, as if they were alive, reacting to the figure's words. The air became heavy, suffocating, pressing down on me like a vice. I staggered, my legs buckling beneath me. I couldn't see anything clearly anymore. The shadows had grown more menacing, more real. They seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, reaching toward me with long, clawed fingers. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shape moving within the shadows, a figure that was not the one in front of me, but something else, something darker, something more terrifying. It moved swiftly, as if it was made from the darkness itself, a form that seemed to flicker and shift like smoke. I couldn't tell whether it was moving toward me or away, but the fear it stirred within me was undeniable. It was like something ancient, something beyond comprehension, and I could feel its eyes on me, its presence crawling up my spine like a slow, creeping chill. I turned my head back to the figure before me. Its face was still obscured in shadow, but there was something different in its posture now, something that spoke of an ancient knowledge, a knowledge that had waited for me, that had drawn me in. "You have entered the place between worlds," the figure said, its voice now calm, almost knowing, "where the reality you know and the one you fear collide." My body trembled as the meaning of its words sank in. The scars, the symbols, they weren't just markings. They were a gateway, a key. This place, this world, whatever it was, I had somehow opened it. The scars were not merely a sign of what had happened to me, but a reflection of what had always been lurking beneath the surface. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead, too heavy to move. The shadows were all around me now, and I realized, with dawning horror, that they were not just figures in the distance. They were me. They were fragments of me, of the person I had once been, twisted and distorted by something I couldn't comprehend. The room felt small and now, more oppressive, as if the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me. I gasped for air, but it was as if the very breath had been stolen from me, as if the room itself was alive, feeding off my fear. "You cannot escape," the figure said again, its voice now a low growl, an echo of inevitability. "You are marked. You belong here." The words sank deep into my soul, and I felt the weight of them. I understood now. The scars were not just on my skin. They were in my mind, in my soul. I had opened the door, but I hadn't understood the cost. I closed my eyes, unable to bear the weight of the truth. And in that moment, I felt it, the presence of something far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. It was not just the shadows or the figures that haunted me. It was something inside me, something that had always been there, hidden in the dark corners of my mind, waiting for the right moment to emerge. I had brought it to life. The figure in front of me stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. I could feel it now, not just in my body, but in my thoughts, in my very soul. The scars burned hotter, searing into me, like the marks of a ritual I had unknowingly completed. "You are part of it now," the figure whispered, its voice like a caress. "And it is part of you." The darkness around me thickened, and I knew then that there was no escape. The place between worlds was not just a realm I had stumbled upon. It was a prison, and I was its prisoner. I had always been its prisoner. The shadows closed in, and I could feel myself being pulled deeper into the darkness, unable to resist. The world I had known, the life I had tried to escape, everything had crumbled away, leaving nothing but the scars on my skin and the weight of the knowledge that I was no longer who I had been. I was something else now. Something worse. And there was no going back. Have you ever worked in a place that just doesn't feel right? A place where the air is heavy with something unspoken, something that you can't quite touch but know is there, lurking in the corners of your mind? That's how it was for me when I started working at the old building on Fifth Avenue. I didn't think much of it at first. It was just a job, and the building itself, while ancient, didn't seem particularly remarkable until I started hearing the stories. The basement, specifically. It was always the basement. At first, I thought it was just idle gossip from the older staff, those who had been there for years, some of them decades. They would sit in the break room, their voices low, eyes darting nervously as if the walls themselves might be listening. "Have you heard about the noises?" one of the janitors asked me on my second day. His name was Mike, a man with graying hair and a hard stare. He spoke slowly, as if weighing every word carefully. I didn't want to appear too curious, so I simply nodded. "They say the place is haunted," Mike continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some of the older folks swear they've seen things down there. Shadows that move. Doors that slam shut on their own. Sounds, too, like footsteps, but there's nobody there." I chuckled nervously, brushing it off as nothing more than superstition. But I was wrong to dismiss it so easily. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the stories, either. It was the way the building felt. The basement, in particular, was a place I had to walk past several times a day. The thick steel door that led down to it always seemed to creak open by itself while I passed by, and I couldn't help but glance down the stairs. The hallway leading to it was dim, poorly lit by a single flickering light bulb, casting long shadows on the walls. There was a chill in the air down there, a cold that seemed to seep into your bones the moment you stepped foot on the first stair. One night, I was assigned to stay late and finish some paperwork. I wasn't expecting to be there past dark, but the work was piling up. As the hours ticked by, I realized I was the only one left in the building. The sound of my typing was the only noise in the otherwise silent office. That's when I heard it. A faint sound from below. It was so quiet at first that I thought it might be the wind outside or maybe the hum of the building settling. But then, it came again, footsteps. Soft, deliberate steps echoing from the basement. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. Nobody should have been down there. I tried to tell myself that it was just the building shifting, the plumbing, or maybe even my imagination playing tricks on me after a long day. But then the footsteps came again, closer this time. I couldn't move. My fingers gripped the edge of my desk as I stared at the door to the hallway. The footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, almost as if someone was walking up the stairs toward me. My mind raced, trying to explain it, to make sense of what was happening. I considered calling someone, but my phone felt miles away, out of reach. I stood up and slowly approached the door to the hall. With a deep breath, I opened it. Nothing. The hallway was empty. My pulse raced, and a cold sweat trickled down my neck. I stepped into the hallway, looking down toward the stairs leading to the basement. The door to the basement was slightly ajar, and I could see the faintest sliver of darkness beyond. I told myself that I was being ridiculous, that it was just the wind or some old pipes making those sounds. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I took a cautious step toward the stairs. That's when I noticed something else. A soft, uneven scratching sound, like something dragging across the floor. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The sounds, though, continued. A scratch, then a pause, followed by another scrape. It was coming from the basement. My curiosity got the best of me. I couldn't just ignore it. I had to see what was happening. But as I stepped toward the basement door, I hesitated. I was standing at the edge of the unknown, and deep down, I felt like I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. I forced myself to grab the door handle, pushing it open with a creak that echoed through the silent hall. The basement stairwell was darker than I remembered, the single light at the bottom flickering intermittently. And then, just as I was about to take a step down, the door slammed shut behind me. The noise was deafening. My breath caught in my throat. I whirled around, but there was no one there. The door locked. I had no choice but to descend. One step. Another. The temperature dropped with each rung, and the air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp stone. Then, halfway down, the light above flickered one final time and went out completely. The sudden darkness swallowed me whole. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The only sound in the air was the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I reached out instinctively, my hand brushing against the cold stone wall, trying to orient myself in the utter blackness. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, but I could feel the oppressive weight of the darkness pressing in around me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn back, to run, but my feet were already moving, compelled by something I couldn't explain. Something that told me I had to go deeper. Another step. A creak from above, the sound of the basement door shifting slightly, as if something was watching me. I froze again, listening intently, but there was no sound that followed. The air had become unnaturally still, and the silence felt too complete. Too deliberate. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my shoes scraping softly against the concrete floor. The light was gone now, leaving nothing but darkness, the same cold, heavy feeling enveloping me. I should have turned around, gone back up, but I couldn't shake the nagging sense that I had to see what was down here. It was as if I was being drawn towards something. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I felt along the wall for a switch. I found it after a few seconds, my hand pressing against the cool metal of the light switch. I held my breath as I flipped it on. Nothing. The light didn't come on. The darkness remained. Panic began to creep in, but I fought it back. I couldn't let myself lose control. I needed to stay calm. There had to be a reason. The bulb must have burned out, or there was a fault in the wiring. It was nothing more than a coincidence. But I knew deep down it wasn't just a coincidence. I took a step further into the basement, feeling the walls for any sign of movement, of something else that might explain the strange sensation that seemed to hang in the air. The room stretched out before me in pitch black silence, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. The scratching noise returned. This time, it was louder. Closer. It was coming from somewhere ahead of me, deeper into the basement. I didn't want to go any further, but my legs moved on their own. I felt as though something was pulling me, forcing me forward, down that dark path. The scratching grew louder, like claws on stone. My throat tightened, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the scratching ceased. The silence was deafening. A new sound filled the air, the sound of breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized the noise wasn't coming from the walls or the floor, it was coming from the shadows ahead of me. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. I felt the presence in the darkness, something standing just out of my line of sight, waiting. Hello? My voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the vast emptiness. There was no response, just the sound of my own breath, shaky and uneven. I waited for an answer that never came. The breathing continued. I took another step, and then another, my mind screaming for me to turn back. But I couldn't. I couldn't explain why, but I felt as if I needed to go further, to get closer to whatever was lurking in the shadows. I rounded a corner, my body trembling with fear, and there it was. A figure. A shape, not fully human, but there, just at the edge of my vision. It was hunched, crouching low to the ground, its back arched in an unnatural way. The outline of its form was barely visible, like a shadow too dark for the surrounding darkness. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But then it moved. It took a step forward, the sound of its feet dragging across the concrete floor sending a chill down my spine. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on something, and I fell to the ground. My heart raced as I pushed myself up, scrambling to get away, but the figure was closer now. It was walking toward me, its breath slow and ragged, like it was savoring each step. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and suffocating. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. I turned and ran. The air was thick and suffocating as I sprinted through the darkness, my hands desperately feeling the walls for direction. I heard the shuffling behind me, always just out of reach, but never stopping. The sound was too close, too persistent. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape them. I reached the stairs, my legs burning from the effort, but just as I placed my foot on the first step, I felt something brush against my shoulder. I whipped around, but the basement was empty. The figure was gone. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. Had it been real? Or had I imagined it? My mind screamed for an answer, but no matter how much I tried to rationalize what had happened, the unease never left. It lingered in the air, in the corners of the room, in the deepest recesses of my mind. I didn't want to stay in the basement any longer, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Something told me I couldn't leave, that whatever was down there had marked me, had noticed me. And it wasn't finished with me yet. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, my heart still racing. The dim light from the hallway behind me cast long shadows, but it didn't feel safe. I couldn't escape the feeling that something had followed me out of the basement. That something, someone, was waiting, watching from the darkness. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to calm my frantic thoughts. The air felt thick, as if the entire building had inhaled deeply, holding its breath. I could still feel the oppressive presence from below, lurking just out of sight. The sudden sound of a door creaking open made me jump. I whipped around, my mind desperately trying to make sense of what was happening, but there was nothing there. Just the quiet of the hallway stretching out before me. I needed to leave. I had to. The unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach grew stronger with each passing second. I could still hear that heavy, dragging breath in my ears, and the image of that figure crouched in the dark haunted me like a memory I couldn't shake. I walked quickly to the elevator, pressing the button with more force than necessary. The bell dinged, and the doors slid open with a soft whir. But as I stepped inside, the air shifted, becoming colder. A chill ran through my spine, and I pulled my coat tighter around me. The elevator began its slow ascent. I watched the numbers on the display above the doors slowly count up, but it felt like it was taking forever. I couldn't shake the sensation that the figure, whatever it was still down there, still aware of my presence, still waiting for me. I glanced at the reflection in the polished steel of the elevator doors. Nothing but my own pale face staring back at me. But something was off. The reflection was blurry, distorted. I blinked and stared harder, but it didn't change. It wasn't just the elevator's glass, there was something wrong with me. My reflection. It wasn't me anymore. For a brief moment, I thought I saw the shadow of a figure behind me in the reflection. I spun around. Empty. just the empty elevator. But the chill in the air had grown colder, more tangible. My breath misted in front of me. I quickly pressed the button for the ground floor again, the sharp sound of my finger hitting the button echoing in the quiet space. The elevator jerked to a stop, and the doors slid open. But it wasn't the ground floor. It was the basement. I froze. My body went numb, and my mind screamed for me to escape. But the doors remained open. I could hear the faint sound of the scratching again, only now it was louder, more desperate. The figure, whatever it was closer. I didn't understand. How had I gotten back here? The elevator had just been going up. There was no way it could have reversed direction so suddenly. No way it could have. A voice, low and muffled, came from the dark depths of the basement. It was too quiet at first, but then it grew louder. Words, distorted and broken, drifted up to me. Come back. The whisper was soft, almost pleading. It was unmistakably human, but there was something wrong with it. A figure appeared in the doorway of the elevator, its form partially obscured by the darkness. It wasn't the same shape I'd seen before, but it was just as unsettling. A tall figure, hunched slightly, with unnaturally long limbs. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed faintly in the darkness, like two cold embers smoldering. I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the floor, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might explode. The figure didn't speak again. It didn't have to. I could feel the malevolent intent in the air. The whispering had stopped, but now the air was thick with a deep, pulsing tension. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to flee before it was too late, but my legs refused to move. The figure stepped forward, its long, thin fingers brushing the elevator doors, and I swore I could feel its touch on the other side of the metal. The doors began to close slowly. No. Not now. Not like this. I pushed with all my might, slamming my palm against the metal, trying to force the doors open again, but they didn't budge. The coldness from outside crept into the small space, and the faint sound of the figure's breath grew louder in the confined space. The elevator jolted upward again, this time with a violent shudder. I almost lost my balance as it ascended at a rapid pace. The basement door slid out of sight, but I knew it wasn't gone. The presence was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. I could feel it. My pulse raced as the numbers above the door flickered rapidly, as though the elevator was struggling to decide where to take me. The floors passed in quick succession, too quickly, the whole ride feeling like a blur. Finally, the elevator stopped. The doors slid open with a faint ding, and I found myself on the 5th floor, the floor I'd just come from. The hallway was eerily quiet. No sounds. No movement. The air, still thick with unease, hung around me like a blanket. I stumbled out of the elevator, looking around, searching for any sign of life. But there was nothing. I thought I was safe. I thought I had escaped. But I could still feel it. Them. The presence was closer than ever. I took a few shaky steps down the hallway, my heart still racing, but my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I was no longer certain about anything. The reality I once knew felt like it was slipping away, and the walls around me seemed to close in tighter with each passing moment. I could still hear that faint breathing, like someone standing just behind me, but when I spun around, nothing. Just the silent, empty hallway stretching out before me. I felt like I was losing control, like I was walking through a dream, except I couldn't wake up. My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone. The screen flickered on, but the time was strange, off by hours, as if it had skipped ahead without my consent. The numbers shifted before my eyes, like they were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't make sense of them. The hum of fluorescent lights above me seemed louder now, almost deafening in its persistence. I walked faster, hoping the movement would make the unease go away. I glanced at the closed doors of the offices along the hallway. No one was there. No one would be there. No one had been there in days, if not longer. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed behind me. It wasn't a normal sound. Not the click of heels on tile or the shuffle of sneakers across the floor. It was a dragging, uneven step, a sound so unnatural it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I spun around, but once again, there was nothing. No one. The hallway remained silent, still as ever. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to steady my nerves. It had to be my imagination. The stress. The lack of sleep. But then I heard it again. A low, dragging noise. Closer now. I started walking faster, my steps quickening, but the sound of those footsteps behind me mirrored my own, matching my pace. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't escape it. I could feel my pulse hammering in my chest, my head spinning. The sound was now right behind me. I could almost feel the presence, like something was breathing down my neck. And then, nothing. Complete silence. I stopped in my tracks, my breath caught in my throat. The hairs on my arms stood up as I slowly turned to face the elevator at the end of the hallway. For a moment, I just stared at the closed doors, my mind telling me to run, to get away, but my feet remained rooted to the floor. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, mechanical whir. But it wasn't the elevator. Not like I remembered it. The lights inside flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls, and the air inside was heavy, thick with something I couldn't identify. It felt wrong. I took a step toward it before I realized what I was doing. The doors of the elevator were wide open now, and I could see inside. The air was no longer cold, but a stifling heat pressed against me, making it hard to breathe. Suddenly, I wasn't sure if I should go in or turn around. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get away from whatever was calling me. But my body refused to listen. Every step felt like I was being pulled closer against my will. I stepped into the elevator, my feet moving of their own accord. The doors slid shut behind me. The air inside was thick and humid now, heavier than before. I glanced at the display above the doors. The numbers flickered, shifting between floors with an unnatural speed. They didn't make sense. As I watched the numbers jump wildly from one floor to the next, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the darkened corners of the elevator. It was too late to go back. I realized I'd already descended into the abyss. The walls of the elevator seemed to close in around me as the lights dimmed further, casting strange, twisting shadows on the walls. I looked up, only to see a figure standing across from me, just at the edge of the elevator. The same tall figure. But its face was nothing now. Hollow eyes, skin stretched too tight, lips pulled back in a grotesque grin that didn't belong to any living person. My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to push the button and get the hell out, but I couldn't move. The figure didn't move either. It just stood there, staring at me with eyes that weren't eyes, like deep black holes. The elevator jolted to a stop. I looked up at the numbers above the door. It was the basement floor. Again. No. No, this couldn't be happening. I knew I hadn't pressed any buttons. My heart raced, pounding so loud in my chest I thought it would rupture. The figure stood there, unmoving, its form somehow taking up all the space in the small compartment, making it impossible to think clearly. The doors slid open again. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. Outside, the basement was like a living nightmare. The walls seemed to stretch and bend, warping in ways they never had before. The lights flickered, casting twisted shadows that twisted and writhed like something alive. I could hear faint whispers in the distance, too quiet to make out, but definitely there. The figure didn't move, but I felt its presence behind me, pushing me forward. And then I heard it. That whisper again. The same low, broken voice from before. Come back. You're one of us now. The words pierced my mind, sinking into me like a knife. I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't move. The darkness was too thick now, and the air felt suffocating. I stepped out of the elevator. The moment my feet hit the basement floor, the air around me shifted. It wasn't just colder, it felt dense, as though I was submerged in water, struggling to breathe with each inhalation. I was barely able to hold myself upright, my legs weak beneath me. The whispering didn't stop. It was everywhere now, echoing from every corner, each word crawling inside my mind. You're not alone here. I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on me, pulling me deeper into the shadows. The dim light from the flickering bulbs cast grotesque, twisting figures along the walls, their forms shifting and stretching like something caught in the corner of your eye, never fully there, but always watching. I took a tentative step forward. The floor creaked under my weight, and I flinched at the sound, certain it had been too loud. But nothing happened. Nothing moved. Still, the feeling of being observed was overwhelming. I wasn't alone. I never had been. The elevator doors behind me closed with a hollow thud, sealing me inside this strange, suffocating space. Panic crept up my spine, making every muscle in my body tense. But I couldn't move. Couldn't run. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were like a chorus of voices, each one blending with the next, until I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. Some of the voices were familiar, like the voices of the coworkers who had spoken of this place, of the strange occurrences they'd witnessed, the things they'd seen but couldn't explain. Others were strange, foreign. I didn't recognize them, but they felt personal, as though they knew me better than I knew myself. Turn back. It's too late now, one voice hissed. Come deeper. It's waiting, another cooed. I could hear footsteps again. The dragging, uneven steps, but this time they were closer, too close. My heartbeat quickened as I spun around, expecting to see the tall figure again, the one with the hollow eyes. But there was nothing. Only the darkness. Only the shadows, flickering and crawling on the walls, stretching out like tendrils waiting to wrap around me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. I couldn't stay here. I had to find a way out, but every step felt like I was sinking deeper into this nightmare. I started walking, my feet dragging with each movement. The whispers didn't stop, they followed me, like an endless echo. Suddenly, I froze. A door. A familiar door. The one I had passed countless times, never giving it a second thought. The door to the storage room. I didn't know why it had caught my attention now, but something about it called to me. It stood open, the darkness inside swallowing up the light from the hallway, making it seem like a hole in the world itself. I couldn't ignore it. I took a step toward it, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorframe. As I stepped inside, the temperature dropped even further. My breath became visible in front of me, clouding the air, thickening it with the weight of something far more sinister. And then, I saw it. At the back of the room, just beyond the shelves of discarded office supplies, a figure was standing, its back turned toward me. I could barely make out its shape, but I knew it was there. I felt it, like a presence so strong it almost crushed the air out of my lungs. "Welcome back," the voice echoed through the room. It wasn't a whisper anymore, it was clear. It was deep, resonant, almost soothing in its malice. The figure slowly turned around. It wasn't the tall, shadowy figure I had seen before. This one was different. Its face was pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that stared into mine with an intensity that made my stomach turn. But it wasn't just the eyes. It was the way it moved. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its limbs were too long, too twisted, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled too tight. "You shouldn't have come down here," it said, its voice scraping across my skin like nails on a chalkboard. "Now you're part of the story. Part of the basement." My chest tightened, and I stumbled backward. The whispers seemed to grow louder, more frantic. They surrounded me, filling my mind, until I could hardly tell where they began and where they ended. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My mouth was dry, my tongue thick in my throat. The figure took a step forward, and I felt the air around me change again, colder now, suffocating. "You've seen too much," it said, its voice dropping to a low growl. "And now you'll stay. Forever." I backed up, but my body was frozen, every step like a battle against invisible chains that held me in place. The walls of the storage room seemed to close in around me, narrowing until there was only the figure, its hollow eyes, and the suffocating darkness. I could feel my sanity slipping, piece by piece, as if the room itself was devouring me, pulling me into someone I didn't recognize. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me was the voice of the figure, close, too close. "You'll never leave." And then there was nothing. Have you ever woken up with the feeling that you've lost something important, but you can't remember what it was? It's like a piece of your mind has disappeared into thin air, and you're left chasing fragments of something you can't quite grasp. That's what it felt like the morning I first realized something was wrong with my memory. At first, it was subtle, small moments slipping away, little gaps in the days that had gone by. But soon, the gaps began to multiply. It wasn't just the small things anymore. Entire days, entire events were becoming foggy and distant, like a dream I had once lived but couldn't remember. And the more I tried to recall, the more the pieces scattered. It's hard to explain. One moment, I would be sitting at my desk at work, staring at the computer screen, and the next, nothing. No recollection of what I had been doing before, or even the feeling of having been there at all. It was as if the world around me was slowly dissolving into static. The people I interacted with, their faces started to blur, their voices fading in and out, like a broken radio signal. It wasn't long before I began noticing something even stranger. The memories I could hold onto started to shift. They began to fragment, like shards of glass, and when I tried to fit them together, they no longer made sense. They didn't match the life I was living. It was as though my mind was trying to piece together a different reality, one that felt foreign, but also oddly familiar. I remember one particular day. I had been walking through the park, just a few blocks from my apartment. The sun was bright, the air cool, and everything seemed normal except for one thing. As I passed a bench, I saw a face. A face I couldn't quite place, but one that seemed important. I stopped, staring at the person, trying to recall where I had seen them before. But nothing came to mind. The more I tried to remember, the more I felt as if I was slipping away from myself. It was only when I walked past them and saw the reflection of my own face in the glass of a nearby store that I realized my reflection was different. My face looked the same, but there was something off about it. A faint blur around the edges, as though I wasn't entirely there. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but when I looked again, everything seemed fine. Still, that feeling, the sensation of not being fully connected to myself, lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control, that my mind was unraveling bit by bit. The more I tried to hold on to the present, the more the past seemed to pull me into its tangled web. And the fragments, those broken pieces of memory, started to merge into something else. Something darker. I could hear the whispers in the corners of my mind now. They were faint at first, but growing louder each day. They weren't like thoughts, but more like echoes of something else, like a memory that wasn't mine, but somehow was. I don't know how long it took before I started seeing them, those strange images, those distorted glimpses of other realities. They came to me in flashes, like fleeting dreams. One moment, I was sitting at my kitchen table, and the next, there was a room, a dimly lit room I didn't recognize, but it felt real. I could see it so clearly, its cracked walls, the peeling paint, the heavy wooden door at the far end of the room. And just when I was about to move closer, the vision would fade, slipping away like water through my fingers. But it wasn't just visions. It was also sounds. I would hear things, distant voices, faint footsteps, a door creaking open. And when I turned around, there was nothing. I would feel a presence, like someone was standing just behind me, watching me, but when I looked, there was no one there. It was becoming harder to distinguish between what was real and what was part of this new world I seemed to be drifting into. And the more I tried to hold on to my own reality, the more it started slipping away. I knew something was happening to me. My mind was splintering, and I was losing myself, losing the grip on everything that once made sense. But the hardest part was this. I wasn't sure if I was falling into madness or if I was being pulled into another world, a world that was somehow always there, just behind the surface of my own. And then, the first piece of the puzzle arrived. A note slipped under my door, written in a hurried, uneven script. Don't trust what you see. You're not alone. The words sent a chill down my spine. Who had left it? How did they know what was happening to me? I didn't know where to turn, who to ask for help. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of my own broken memories, and the more I struggled, the deeper I sank. And those pieces, those fragments, they continued to pile up. Each one was like a shard of glass, cutting into me, leaving me more and more confused, more lost. I could only wonder, what was happening to me? And, more importantly, was I ever going to find a way back? I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me, but it was impossible. The note had only been the beginning. Over the next few days, I began to notice more signs, small, unsettling details that seemed to confirm the creeping sense of unease in my gut. It started with the dreams. At first, they were faint, like a shadow brushing the edge of my consciousness. But as the days passed, they grew more vivid, more intense. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, unable to remember where I was or how I'd gotten there. And each time I blinked, The dreams felt more like memories, like they had already happened. Like they were a part of me. The place in my dreams was always the same. It was a hallway, dimly lit, with walls that seemed to pulse as though they were alive. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the faint sound of whispers filled the silence. I could never make out the words, but I felt them, felt their urgency, their desperation. And at the end of the hallway, there was a door. A door that seemed to beckon me, even though I knew I shouldn't go near it. But every time, I found myself moving toward it, my body acting on its own, as though it had a will separate from mine. The closer I got to the door, the more the whispers grew louder, the more the walls seemed to close in. And just as my hand was about to reach for the doorknob, I would wake up. In a panic. Heart pounding in my chest, gasping for air. It wasn't long before I started to see things during the day, too. It wasn't just the flashes of unfamiliar places, the blurred faces, or the voices I thought I could hear in the distance. It was physical, the feeling of something brushing against my skin when I was alone. The chill that would sweep through the room, the temperature dropping so quickly it left me shivering. And the shadows, always lurking in the corners of my vision, darting just out of sight whenever I tried to look directly at them. At work, things grew even stranger. I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on a project, when I noticed something odd. My coworker, Lisa, was talking to me, her words flowing smoothly, but her face looked wrong. It wasn't that she was out of focus or blurry. No, it was more than that. Her expression shifted, subtly, in a way that made my heart skip a beat. It was like her face was shifting, her features warping just for a split second before it snapped back to normal. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, she was sitting there, smiling, oblivious to my confusion. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That it wasn't just me. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Who would believe me? I couldn't even explain it to myself. The more I tried to hold on to my thoughts, the more they slipped away from me, like grains of sand through my fingers. And as I searched for something to ground me, I began to realize that there was nothing to hold on to at all. The pieces kept falling apart. Every memory, every person, every place I had known, had they ever really been mine? Or were they just part of a larger, fractured picture that I was slowly coming to understand? One evening, after work, I found myself walking back to my apartment without thinking. My feet moved on their own, carrying me through the streets, but I didn't know where I was going. It was as if something had taken control of me, pushing me forward towards some unknown destination. I ended up in front of an old, crumbling building I'd never seen before. It stood in the middle of the city, tucked away between two other buildings. The windows were shattered, the door half open, as if inviting me in. There was an odd feeling about it, something both familiar and alien, pulling me closer. Without thinking, I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was suffocating. I could barely make out the shape of the walls in the dim light, but there was something about this place that felt wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and the whispers that had been just out of reach now seemed to be right next to me. I turned quickly, but there was no one. No sound but my own breath, heavy and erratic in the stillness. I walked deeper into the building, feeling the coldness seep into my bones. And that's when I saw it. A door at the far end of the hallway. It wasn't like the other doors in the building, this one was different. It looked newer, almost pristine, as though it didn't belong here. It stood out like a sore thumb. I felt drawn to it, like it was the answer to everything that had been happening to me. My mind screamed for me to turn around, to leave this place, but my body wouldn't obey. I walked toward the door, every step echoing in the silence, my heart pounding louder with each passing second. I reached for the doorknob, and as my fingers brushed against it, I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through my body. It wasn't painful, but it was enough to make me gasp, enough to make my whole body stiffen in shock. The moment I turned the knob, the whispers stopped. And then, everything went silent. I stepped through the door, unsure of what I was about to face, but I knew one thing for sure, there was no going back. The room beyond the door was nothing like I had expected. It wasn't a typical room at all. There were no walls, no ceiling, no floor beneath my feet. It was as though I had stepped into some kind of void, a vast, endless expanse of shifting, swirling colors and shapes that seemed to constantly reshape themselves, never quite settling into anything familiar. I couldn't tell if I was floating or standing, but the sensation of weightlessness pressed against me, as though gravity had abandoned me entirely. The air here felt heavier, thicker, like I was breathing in something that wasn't meant for me. It clung to my lungs, and every breath felt like it could be my last. I tried to take a step forward, but my legs didn't feel like they belonged to me. They moved of their own accord, one step after another, dragging me deeper into the endless space. And then I heard it. At first, it was faint, just a murmur at the edge of my consciousness, like a distant voice calling from the dark. But as I moved further, the voices grew louder, more distinct. They were soft at first, like whispers, like fragments of conversations I couldn't quite understand. But the more I focused on them, the clearer they became. It was the sound of my voice. I froze. The whispers weren't just random. They were my words, my thoughts, my memories, playing out like an old, worn-out tape recorder. I didn't want to hear them, but I couldn't turn away. The voices around me spoke in fragmented phrases, pieces of my own thoughts that had once felt normal but now felt strange. I can't remember why everything's falling apart. Who am I really? I clutched my head, my hands shaking as I struggled to hold on to what little sense of reality I still had. Was this some kind of nightmare? A hallucination? No. It couldn't be. This wasn't just a dream. This was real. A sound from behind me caught my attention. I whipped around, heart racing. I had heard it clearly this time, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step back, but the air felt thick, as though the space itself was pushing me toward the sound. And then, out of the shadows that swirled in the corner of my vision, I saw them. The figures. At first, they were just shapes, indistinct and blurry, but as they moved closer, they began to take form, tall, thin silhouettes with no faces, no distinguishing features. Just figures. The ground beneath me trembled slightly, and I felt the hairs on my neck stand on end. They weren't human. I could feel it in my bones. There was something deeply wrong about them. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I was in danger. My heart was pounding in my chest as I took another step back, but they didn't stop. They moved toward me with an unnerving precision, their steps matching the rhythm of my panicked breath. One of them raised a hand, or what looked like a hand. It was long and slender, its fingers curling unnaturally as though reaching for something just out of grasp. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. My instincts screamed at me to run, to escape this place, but the air was thick with an unseen force, making every step feel like a battle. The voices were still there, growing louder, overlapping each other until they were a cacophony in my mind, drowning out all other sound. "They're coming," I heard my own voice say, my voice, but but it wasn't mine anymore. It was distant, detached, like I was hearing someone else speak through my mouth. You can't escape. You can't leave. I stumbled backward, tripping over the nothingness beneath me, but I kept moving. I had to get away. I didn't know what these things were, but I felt them getting closer, felt their presence closing in around me. Suddenly, the floor beneath me gave way, and I fell. The fall didn't seem to end. It was as if I was falling through time and space itself. The colors blurred around me, spinning faster, the voices turning into a chaotic whirlwind of screams and murmurs that made my head throb with pain. And then, just as quickly as it had started, I hit the ground. I wasn't sure where I was anymore. The air was still thick, but I was no longer surrounded by endless colors. The world around me had solidified into something more familiar, a small, dimly lit room. The walls were cracked and worn, and the floor beneath me felt solid, though it was cold and unforgiving. It was a room I didn't recognize, yet something about it felt known. I slowly got to my feet, my body aching from the fall. As I stood there, the voices faded into an eerie silence, leaving only a ringing in my ears. I looked around, trying to make sense of my surroundings, but there was something in the corner of the room that made my stomach drop. It was a mirror. I approached it cautiously, my reflection distorted in the cracked glass. But it wasn't the reflection that made my blood run cold, it was what I saw standing behind me. The figures. They were back. This time, they weren't shadows. They were real, flesh and bone. They were standing there, just behind me, their faceless heads tilted as if studying me, waiting for something. I froze. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the reflection. And that's when I saw it. One of the figures reached out, its hand coming toward me through the mirror, moving with a slow, deliberate pace. I couldn't breathe. My heart slammed against my chest as the hand reached closer, stretching out from the mirror as though it was trying to pull me in. The figures stood still behind me, their vacant, featureless faces impossible to read. I was frozen, caught between terror and the growing sense of inevitability. The hand, with fingers long and thin, hovered inches from my face. It looked so real. Too real. The reflection in the mirror was perfect, and yet something about it was wrong. I could feel the air growing colder around me, the temperature dropping so rapidly that I could see my breath form in the dim light. I wanted to scream, to shout, to run, but my body refused to obey. My limbs felt like they were encased in stone, each movement a struggle against an invisible force. It was as if the room itself had become a prison, holding me here for reasons I couldn't understand. Then, just as the hand grazed the side of my cheek, the reflection in the mirror shuddered. The world around me warped, as though the very fabric of reality was snapping under the pressure. I stumbled backward, my feet catching on the cold, hard floor beneath me. The hand in the mirror twitched, then jerked forward, its fingers extending far beyond the reflection and reaching into my reality. I gasped, stumbling away, but there was no escape. The figures began to move, stepping forward, their tall, elongated forms closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. I turned to run, but I couldn't escape. The room was shifting again, growing smaller, the walls pressing in. The figures were everywhere now, moving in perfect unison, surrounding me, their presence suffocating. I tried to scream, but my voice was lost in the whirlwind of sound. The whispers from before, the voices that had plagued me, were back, louder now, echoing in my ears. They weren't just whispers anymore, they were words, my words, repeating over and over, each one more frantic than the last. I can't escape. I can't. I can't remember. I turned in circles, searching for something, anything that could help me, but there was nothing. No door. No window. The only thing that remained was the mirror. It was now cracked and fractured, its surface reflecting 1,000 twisted versions of myself. I looked at my reflection, and I didn't recognize the person staring back. The eyes were hollow, empty, like I was looking at someone else. And then, I saw it. In the corner of the reflection, something stirred. It wasn't one of the figures. It was me, or something that looked like me. I could see my reflection moving on its own, twisting and contorting in unnatural ways, as if it were trying to break free of the mirror. It reached out with a distorted hand, its fingers bending unnaturally, its face a grotesque parody of mine. The reflection smiled, a twisted grin stretching across its face. It wasn't a smile of comfort. It was a smile of malice, as if it knew something I didn't. You're here because of me, it whispered, though the words came from everywhere, not just the reflection. We're all here because of what you've done. The room seemed to close in further. My chest felt tight, as though I couldn't breathe, as if the air was being sucked out of the space. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen, my heart beating in a frantic, panicked rhythm. The figures behind me didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to drive the last shred of sanity from my mind. I could feel them pressing in, the weight of their gaze suffocating me. One of them moved closer, so close I could feel its cold breath against the back of my neck. I tried to turn, but I couldn't. And then, the voice from the reflection spoke again, louder this time. You've already seen it, haven't you? You've already seen the cracks. I was suffocating, drowning in this distorted world. The colors, the shapes, they weren't just random anymore. They were real. I couldn't tell where the dream ended and where reality began. My thoughts were shattering into fragments, like the mirror before me, each piece reflecting a different version of myself. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But the room had become a maze. There was no way out. No escape. The mirror's surface began to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. I reached out to touch it, desperate for something, anything, real. My fingers brushed the glass, and the world around me shifted again. But this time, something changed. The figures stopped. They stood still, watching. The air was thick with tension, so dense I could feel it pressing against my skin. I stared at the mirror, knowing what was about to happen. The reflection that had once held my distorted self was now empty, vacant, just like the faces of the figures behind me. It was as though the mirror had swallowed it whole. My reflection was gone, and in its place, nothing. For a moment, everything stood still. Time seemed to freeze, and in the silence, the only sound I could hear was the faint thrum of my own heartbeat. Then, without warning, the mirror shattered. The shards flew outward, splintering through the air in all directions. They didn't just break, they sang. The sound was sharp, high-pitched, like 1,000 screams, all of them coming from somewhere deep within my own mind. I stumbled backward, trying to shield my face from the shards, but there was nowhere to hide. They cut through the air, each one passing by my skin with a whisper of coldness, leaving behind a trail of jagged cuts. I fell, my hands desperately reaching for something to hold onto, but there was nothing. The floor beneath me crumbled, and I was falling again, this time into something far darker, far deeper. And I knew, without a doubt, that I would never escape. I awoke with a start, gasping for air, my chest heaving as if I had just surfaced from drowning. My eyes snapped open, wide and unseeing, trying to grasp the reality around me. For a moment, I thought I was still in that twisted space, the figures, the mirror, the voices, until I felt the solid, cold floor beneath me. I was on the floor, in the same room I had started in. But something was different. Everything around me felt off. I pushed myself up, my hands shaking as I touched the familiar surroundings. The walls, the cracked desk, the dusty windows, they were all still there, unchanged. But there was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. A wrongness that buzzed in the air like static. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in deep cuts, the blood still fresh. I touched my face, no wounds there, but I could feel the tightness of tension in my skin as though something had marked me. The mirror. I turned toward the wall where it had once stood, but it was gone. Not shattered. Gone. The space was bare, like it had never been there. The emptiness of the spot where it used to be gnawed at my mind. Had it really existed? Or was it just part of the madness? The silence in the room was suffocating, the air thick with an oppressive stillness. I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. What was real? Was any of this real? Then, a sound. A faint rustling. I froze. It was coming from the corner of the room. My pulse quickened as I moved toward it, step by careful step, my eyes scanning the space. There, in the shadowed corner, was a small pile of papers. At first, I thought it was just debris, something I had overlooked. But as I moved closer, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, a single piece of paper covered in scribbled words. I bent down and picked it up, my hands trembling as I examined it. The words were hastily written, the ink smudged in places, as though they had been written in a hurry, no, in panic. And yet, they were familiar. You're not done yet. I felt my stomach lurch. The words felt like a warning, but from whom? The scribbles weren't mine, but they were written in a language I knew. It was as if the words had come from the corners of my own mind, something I had somehow forgotten, or perhaps something I had forgotten to remember. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I had been here before. I scanned the rest of the page, the ink bleeding into the paper as I read the next line. You cannot leave. You will always return. The words were like a curse, an imprint of something far older and more terrifying than I could comprehend. A memory, no, an echo, of something I had tried to bury. And then I heard it. A soft click. I turned toward the door. It had been ajar, just a sliver open, but now it creaked, slowly, agonizingly, as if someone, or something, on the other side was pushing against it. The door moved with a force that was both subtle and unyielding, almost as if it were being pulled open by invisible hands. I stood frozen, watching the door inch open further. The air in the room grew heavier with each passing second, as though the walls themselves were closing in, drawing the very air from my lungs. Then, I saw it. A shadow. At first, it was just a flicker, something at the edge of my vision. But it grew, stretching along the floor and up the walls, twisting and contorting as if it were a living thing. It was moving. I stepped back, heart racing, my mind struggling to keep pace with the chaos around me. The shadow was no longer just a trick of the light. It had substance now. It was creeping toward me, slow and deliberate, filling the space with a presence I couldn't escape. I tried to move, to run, but my legs refused to respond. I was rooted to the spot, my body betraying me, as if I were already part of the shadow, already sinking into its depths. The door creaked again, this time swinging open completely. On the other side, I saw nothing. Just darkness. It wasn't a shadow, it was pure darkness, an absence of light that stretched infinitely beyond the threshold. I could hear the whispers again, louder now, as if they were coming from within that abyss. The voices, they were my own, but distorted, twisted. You're here because of me. I will always be here. The words were familiar, like a mantra, but each one sent a shock of panic through my chest. They weren't just spoken, they were felt. They reached me. They wrapped around my mind like a vice. I felt the pull again. Not just physically, but mentally. The pieces of my memory, the fractured bits, the fragments that had once made up my life, were slipping, dissolving, as though they had never existed in the first place. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but it was no use. The darkness was consuming everything, my thoughts, my memories, my very existence. And then, the door slammed shut. The room was silent again. But it wasn't the same silence. It was empty. The walls felt closer, the air suffocating. The floor beneath me seemed to shift, as if the very foundation of the building was no longer stable. I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel it. There were other presences in the room now, pressing in, standing just out of my reach. I couldn't see them, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. The fragments of my mind, the broken pieces of the mosaic, began to fit together. But they didn't create a picture of my life. They created something far worse. The pieces formed a world I didn't recognize, a reality that wasn't mine. It was a place of shadows, a place of darkness. And in the center of it, I saw myself, twisted, broken, lost. It was a world without escape. A world where I was trapped forever. A world made from the shattered fragments of my own mind. And now, there was no way out. The mosaic of my dreams had become my prison, and I was trapped inside. Forever. This has been a long, dark journey through the night with Whisper Crowley. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Leave a like if these stories made you look at the darkness a little differently, and share in the comments what you enjoyed most or what gave you chills. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next Sinister Whispers. Until we meet again in the world of shadows.